Um, Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Friday, October 30th, 2020 County Council meeting. We're going to start off the meeting with a proclamation recognizing Emancipation Day by County Executive Elrich and myself, and then we're going to go into the work sessions on the subdivision staging policy. When I ask my colleagues to please put your cameras on, take yourselves off camera so that we can show the proclamation as we're reading it. So with that, Mr. County Executive, would you like to discuss the Emancipation Day?
On November 1st, just a couple of days from now, in 1864, Maryland redid its constitution and basically required the freedom of all those folks who had been held in bondage, which were the black slaves in the state. And we were the first state south of the Mason-Dixon line, which is, so we were one of the southern states. And it was done by decision of the government. It wasn't something that was forced. It was a change. It was voted on as a change in the Constitution. We are 156 years past that date. And I think, it's important to remind people that that act alone was not sufficient to guarantee equal rights and equal access. For more than 100 years after that date, the situation in the state and elsewhere in the country was pretty dire. And while we've made progress since then, we continue to struggle with full equality and full rights. So that was the beginning of a process. I'll just say it's 156 years is a long time to get to the right thing. And we just need to continue to do our part to complete that work. Do you want to make any comments?
I do. I was just gonna say, and when you started speaking, it made me remember that I could Google it this fast, but it made me remember my history as well. And of course, you said that Maryland was one of the southern states. Actually, Maryland was a border state, and I just looked this up to make certain that my memory was correct. Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri were slave states, but they didn't secede from the Union. So we were considered border states. First off, it's hard to believe that in the United States, at any time, that a person thought it was okay to own another person. But that's what we had. I mean, that is certainly what took place in Maryland, and it took place in the United States. And of course, we certainly are far from proud of that part of our history, but it's certainly part of our history, and we need to never forget what went on. And of course, the fact that there's today's proclamation on the Emancipation Proclamation certainly was the correct thing for Maryland to do, and the fact that Maryland was the first state south of the Mason-Dixon line to do it. Obviously, there is a sense of being correct on that as well. So anyhow, I do believe we have some people here to receive this proclamation, and I saw Jim Stowe was here. Or is there anyone here to receive the proclamation? Jim? I think you're, no, you're not. You're okay.
There I am.
There you are, yeah. And Tiffany, I thought I saw both of you. Did either one of you have any comments before the county executive and I read the proclamation?
Mr. President, the county executive has certainly shared the comments for our entire community. I would just simply add that the move that took place back in 1864, as he mentioned, was a move of the people. It was a vote of the people. It was so significant that that was the case. that somehow they felt compelled to move beyond where they were to a brand new era in the state of Maryland. That continues, as you're well aware, in terms of our improvement. And I just want to underscore what the county executive has said relative that we have done and made some enormous progress, but we've got much, much, much work to do to be the kind of county that we think we need to be here for all of our residents, from wherever they may come from across the world, and for those of us who've been native to this particular state. Lastly, we've got some great things that are going on throughout this weekend. There is a press release that has been issued that provides a link to our residents as to how they can participate, most of which are virtual, of course, during this COVID-19 kind of environment. But there are some that are, in fact, able to be done in person with all of the various social distancing requirements in place. So we would, again, encourage persons to go to our website, the county's website, and to see that press release, and to be able then to go to the link that provides, again, the various descriptions and information about activities going on throughout the weekend, as a matter of fact. And so hopefully the weather will hold out, that those who do have outdoor opportunities to be able to do that, they can connect with those, and those who are doing it virtually, of course, will have that opportunity as well. So we thank you all very much, County Executive, for your leadership in this area, and also to our Council President and all Council members for your support.
Thank you very much. Ms. Ward.
Just very briefly, that was the beginning of justice and freedom for enslaved Africans in Maryland. And I think 100 plus years later, Montgomery County is continuing to seek that justice and equity for those enslaved persons and their descendants with our racial equity work. So I'm proud to do that here with this county council that has been so supportive, and with the county executive who's really been supportive of this work as well. So we continue to move forward.
Well, to both you, Mr. Stowe, and to Reverend Stowe, and to Ms. Ward, thank you for very much for all that you do for all of Montgomery County. We appreciate all of your work and all the people whose lives you have touched and are continuing to touch, and all the lives that you're continuing to save. So with that, Mr. County Executive, if you would please be so kind as to begin reading the proclamation.
All right. Whereas on November 1st, 1864, the state of Maryland penned a new state constitution, marking one of the most pivotal days in the history of the state. And
whereas Maryland's new constitution called for the freedom of all of those held in bondage within its boundaries, and
whereas Maryland was the first state south of the Mason-Dixon line to abolish slavery by vote of the people and not by executive decision, legislative act, or military power. And
whereas on May 15, 2013, Governor Martin O'Malley signed a measure making November 1st, Emancipation Day, to officially recognize the day to celebrate the freeing of slaves in Maryland. And
whereas this year represents the 156th anniversary of this landmark event in our state's history and is commemorated in Montgomery County with activities about sharing the history of slavery in the state with live demonstrations, guided tours of sites of historical significance, and other educational activities.
And now, therefore, do we, Mark Elrich as County Executive and Sidney Katz as County Council President of Montgomery County, Maryland, do hereby proclaim Sunday, November 1st, 2020, as Emancipation Day in Montgomery County, Maryland, and encourage all residents to participate in educational activities to help in their understanding and the appreciations of the significance of this day in our history. It's signed today by both County Executive Elrich and myself. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So with that, and of course, all of our guests are welcome to stay for our entire meeting. If they would notice, they left immediately. But anyhow, good seeing everybody. And with that, we're going to begin our work session. Madam Clerk, it is my understanding there are no changes or additions to the agenda. Is that correct?
That's correct, Council President.
Thank you. And with that, we're going to begin our work session. I have been contacted by several council members that have expressed to me that they would prefer that we not do straw votes today, that we hold our straw votes on these topics that we're going to be discussing until a later day. There are council members on both sides of that issue, and so as far as I'm concerned, we are fine not to have the straw votes, but at some point before we continue, we need to have, I believe, a general discussion on the topic in its entirety before we take a final vote. So please, council members, let me know where you are. I think 3 or 4 council members that do not want straw votes. Councilmember Reamer, please.
Thank you. I think there is a lot that we will be taking up today that we can vote on. There are just a few points that might lend themselves to more discussion rather than a vote today. But for example, if we can get into the transportation piece, I think there was consensus on almost everything from the committee, just as an example. But I certainly think there's a huge volume of content that we are not going to get through today. We're not going to get there. So first of all, I think there's no way we will recordation tax. So we can set that aside for today. The other issues around, like, I think the opportunity zone question, I think we ought to set that aside today. I would think that the rest of it we might be able to have a straw vote on. There's not that much if you set aside opportunity zones and recordation tax. I certainly will defer to the will of the body, but I think we're pretty close on most everything else.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Navarro.
Yeah, I agree with Chairman Reamer. I think that, I guess let me express a couple of things. There's no doubt that this has been quite an undertaking. When we did this the last time, I feel like there was quite a lot more of structure. The structure was a little bit different. So I acknowledge that this has not been an easy process, especially because we're virtual. We're dealing with the pandemic. So there are a lot of things that are pretty significant. So I will acknowledge that. I personally was, up until 10 p.m. last night with my staff kind of going through a lot of things. So there's no doubt that this is taking a lot of extra time and work. But then again, my concern is that if we do have a deadline, how are we going to meet that deadline? If there seems to be, it's significant that 4 council members believe that they don't want to take straw votes because there's obviously a lot of more information that is needed. But if that's the case, then do we need to take a step back to understand, what is the broad sort of macro vision here that we're trying to achieve? And again, I don't know how that's going to get handled. But my only concern is that, and I understand because I feel the same, pressure and stress of trying to keep up with all the things that are on our plate right now. I just don't know, Mr. President, what will be the process or the timeline for us to meet this deadline. We don't have session next week. There's a presidential election happening. Just so many things. So I think that if we could figure out what are those pieces that we can move forward, and then it seems to me the staff should be meeting with you, Council President, in order to gather input from council members on what may be those areas that we need to come back with. And I personally would appreciate, the packet is huge. If there was a way for us to be able to carve out what are the areas that we're going to address or deliberate on and decide on, and give that to council members on a separate document. I understand there's like a master document, but it is very hard to try to figure all that out within that huge document that we were given, especially because we're virtual, very different process. So wanted to just share my personal take on process and how we move forward. But obviously, Mr. President, it's up to you to let us know how we would proceed in order to meet the deadline, or if we're not going to meet the deadline, then what would be the alternative? Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson, please.
Yeah, I appreciate the comments of Councilmember Navarro. I share the same question and concern. I was under the impression that the way that this was going to go is we would go through the process. The committees have met, deliberated on these items. We have significant amount of staff packets. I recognize that I was in all of those committee sessions and not all council members were, but that we would take straw votes, if there's anything that folks need additional information on, we could get them. But then we come back once the straw votes are taken with the bigger picture of how all of the straw votes fit together, make any final decisions we need, and then the staff needs time to put that into a resolution for a final vote. I'm concerned, based on the timeline that we have, as Councilmember Navarro just mentioned, whether or not the staff is going to be able to have the time that they need to put together the resolution that we'll be able to meet the deadlines that we are statutorily required to meet. And so I just like to get information on both what is the staff timeline, go back from when we need to approve this on the 16th, what is the process that the staff needs for what decisions to be made by what time, and then what is the formal plan for when these votes are going to be taken. I mean, eventually we're going to have to vote on this stuff. Eventually we're going to have to make decisions. So sooner or later, we're going to have to make choices. I recognize that these are all tough choices, and we're going to have to make them, but I'd like to get that information from staff to make sure that we don't keep meeting, not taking straw votes, pushing off anything that's controversial, and then ultimately the clock runs out and we've run out of time and haven't given this the time that is needed to make the tough decisions we're going to have to make.
Thank you. I think it's not just pushing off the difficult decisions. I think people are very concerned about how this puzzle is going to fit together. And we're doing it in piecemeal, and consequently, we're not looking at the whole picture at one time. And I think that's part of the problem. And Dr. Orlin, I'm going to ask you to speak in just a moment. But it's my understanding that though we are under a time constraint. But if we did not vote, and I'm not suggesting that we should not, but if we did not vote by November the 16th, because we have to do it by the 15th, but the 15th is a Sunday, then it's my understanding that if we did not vote, then the current SSP would stay in existence. We could amend the SSP afterwards, and we would, by that amendment, it would have to be advertised for 45 days. It would go out to public hearing. We'd have to basically start a process over, but we could do that as well. And we're not under a statutory requirement to decide the recordation tax or the impact tax under that same time constraint. Dr. Orlin, is that close to being accurate?
Yes, the only thing I'd add to that, Mr. Katz, is that although you're right about the impact tax is not, you don't have to adopt that by November 16th, there's so many connections between the SSP and the impact tax that you really should try to do both of those at the same date. The recordation tax is different, and that could wait an extra week, 2 weeks, whatever you need. But those first two really need to be acted on the 16th. And we were already sort of in our backup plan. We originally did not have this October 30th meeting schedule. We asked for that because of how much material there is to cover. And so now it appears that we're going to try to do as much as we can today, and then on November 10th, have at least a 2-hour, if not longer, work session to go through all the rest of the straw votes that you need to take on at least the SSP and the impact tax bill, so that we can then very hurriedly put together the final resolution for the SSP and the language of the of Bill 3820, so you can act on it on November 16th. So I'm speaking for myself, though I think Pam would agree. Really wish you can go through today and do what Mr. Reamer was saying, which was that on those issues where there's really fair consensus, or there just isn't discussion, even if there isn't exact consensus, to try to have straw votes on those. If you do that, at least we can at least begin to start working on the resolution over the break, and so we'll have less of a mental health problem after November 10th. So that would be my recommendation.
And I appreciate that. I'm going to call on Councilmember Rice and then Councilmember Reamer. But what concerns me, Dr. Orlin, is the term that you used, that we could do this very hurriedly. This is an extremely important topic. And for us to rush something because of a time constraint, which I appreciate we're under one, I believe could be a problem that's far-reaching, more than just beyond today. Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. And look, I've been on this council for a while and know that there are lots of topics that we go through that are incredibly complicated that don't always have a consensus. And so, I'm prepared at this point. I certainly know, being representative of Clarksburg, being on the side of where I didn't have the votes on certain things, and that's just the case. It happens. And so from that perspective, I think that, again, a want for information is one thing. To try and achieve consensus is completely another. And so I think I just really want to thank council staff, because they have worked and bent over backwards to provide us with a lot of information, especially Ms. Dunn. I really want to thank you for providing so much information to my office that we requested to be able to be prepared for this. And just as Councilmember Navarro said, certainly am much more prepared than I was at the last meeting to go over some of these topics and feel confidently that, wherever the chips may fall is where they fall, but still feel as though I'm prepared to make the kinds of decisions. But certainly, like you heard from other council members, the decision is yours as the lead of the council. But certainly, I find myself prepared to move forward today with straw votes on a number of the complicated topics.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. I think it would not be advisable for us to miss the deadline, to have to restart this and go through public hearings all over. I just think we should avoid that. And I think we can easily avoid that. Next Thursday afternoon, I think the council has a hold for joint committees. I don't know if that joint committee is scheduled, but we could certainly add a little bit of breathing room to our process if we added some time on Thursday afternoon next week. I am in the same boat as everyone, grappling with this volume. Unlike, as Andrew said, unlike some council members, I've actually looked at least half or 2/3 of this already at committee. So I'm sympathetic to council members who are grappling with a huge volume of content. I think a little more breathing room next Thursday might help. But for today, I think we can proceed and not vote on a couple of issues and get through everything else. And then I think we'll have a better sense of how much time we might need on the 10th and on the Thursday proceeding.
All right, what I'm going to do, and I have no other council members, and unless, Councilmember Albernaz, please.
Thank you, Mr. Council President. I think the initial recommendation at the beginning, which both chairs agreed to, which was getting through those items, setting aside several, but getting through as many as we can today makes sense. I was up until very late last night reading this packet as well. My continued concern continues to be that, we look at these issues in isolation and not fully being able to process how they are all connected. But I have hope that we'll be able to reconcile those concerns and thoughts at the end. And I should note, I'll be candid, straw votes are straw votes. And once you have more information as you go through this process, then we should acknowledge, and I'm just going to speak for myself here, as more information becomes available and as I better process how these things are connected, it could mean at the very end that the ultimate vote may not be the one that I took from the dais because of the nature of what we're trying to do here. So just an asterisk. But I appreciate where we are right now. And I don't suspect I'm going to change my opinion very much, if at all, but I just want to throw that out there as we go through this discussion to be fully transparent. So I'm fine going through as much as we can today and setting aside those items that maybe do require, that are a little bit more complex to next week or the following. But I totally agree that we need to hit this deadline. It just, starting the shot clock over again, I think is untenable.
And I don't disagree with what you're saying. I just want everybody to know the options, but I don't disagree with what you're saying. And I do appreciate the fact that you're pointing out that straw votes are not final votes. I think we all need to keep that in mind. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think Mr. Albernaz helped with what my question was going. I had a question for you about what exactly you were proposing. I wasn't 100% clear with stating that the SSP, the old one, would stay in place. I mean, I too, again, I'm on the Fed committee. I've joined the GO for some of their sessions on the relevant topics. And it's a monumental amount of information, which is extremely important to the whole kind of trajectory of our county. So I don't think, as a general principle, rushing through or going through it where council members don't feel fully knowledgeable and understand what they're doing or deciding, that's a disservice to voters. So I think if that's the case, we should take as much time as we need. But I mean, obviously, we had a little bit of election next week. We've got a lot going on. We're in the midst of a pandemic. I don't think we should stop our work, as we haven't. We've actually probably accelerated it in a lot of ways, in many items. But I want to make sure people understand, because it's a lot. And to the connectivity point, I mean, if you look at what's on our agenda today, the overall trend of this SSP it's based on a premise of, we need to lower our fees and impact taxes so that we can get development in certain places. That's kind of the premise of it, from my view. The recordation tax acknowledges that we're lowering it in the UPP payment, so to try to offset it in some way makes it more volatile, doesn't offset it all the way, but that was the attempt. And those things are very connected. And so I think, people need to understand that and have that context, but there's a thousand details in between. And so I want to make sure I understand what you're proposing exactly, as far as what we would go through today. Or are you proposing something? I
was giving, not to interrupt you, but I was giving the possibilities, the historic possibilities of what our options could be. I'm not proposing that we not have a vote on November 16th. I'm not proposing that at all, but I wanted everyone to be aware of that option.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. And I'm not saying taking a position one way or the other. I mean, the world isn't going to end whether we act on November 16th or not, but I think we've moved forward. I have a pretty good handle on where it is. I don't agree with every decision we made. Obviously, no one will. But I would be concerned, and I'd be sympathetic if colleagues felt we need more time. I would be supportive of that. That's the statement I wanted to make.
Okay. And Councilmember Friedson, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm fine moving forward. I think the suggestion of moving forward on things that we can agree on, and if there are decision points that require additional information, we put them off to receive them if folks are not ready to vote individually. I think, that could make some sense. I think, like I said, I think ultimately we are going to have to make decisions, and they're not going to get less controversial or difficult, but if more information is needed, I can certainly be sympathetic to that. I would point out that besides the budget and the COVID response, I'm not sure that there's anything that we do that is more significant or more important than this. And so if we need to, I think that the Joint Committee next week should definitely be on the table, and we should be meeting. And everything that is not related to the Board of Health briefings, the federal funding relief reports that we're getting, which I think are essential to what we do and what we're doing, and special appropriations related to FEMA and CARES Act funding should be put off. And we shouldn't be doing proclamations. We shouldn't be introducing new bills. We shouldn't be doing anything other than getting through this policy in order to meet the deadline that we're statutorily required to do. I understand this is an unprecedented time, but this deadline has stood for the entire year. And the idea that we'd be in a position not to hit it makes me extremely uncomfortable. So if we need to, I think we need to make the adjustments to ensure that colleagues are comfortable to take votes and make decisions. I totally agree that after we take straw votes, we need to put everything together and make sure everybody understands the big picture. And if adjustments need to be made, that's totally legitimate. We should allow for time for that. But we need to prioritize what is arguably our most important decision point, which is this policy. Besides the budget, besides COVID, there's nothing else that's more important, and everything else should be put to the side if need be in order to get it done by the deadline.
Okay. Thank you. What I'm going to do then is when we go through, I'm going to ask Ms. Dunn to go through and Dr. Orland to go through as we go through the packets. And I'm going to ask, just like we did before, if this is without objection or by consensus or whatever the terms. I know no one will be bashful to say that they would like more time. And if you do that, then we will have that discussion on that topic each time. We will get through what we can get through now. And if there's someone that needs more time, please let us know, let me know and the rest, and we will deal with that as we go along. But we will try our best to especially those areas that are without objection, to get through those as best we can in this packet. So with that, Ms. Dunn, if you could please, I believe you're the one who's actually beginning this, right?
Yep, I am.
If you would please begin.
Okay, thank you. If you recall, at the end of the council work session we had on Tuesday, we were reviewing the utilization premium payments. The three thresholds had been relatively agreed upon at the 105%, the 120%, the 135%. And then before the council were two different recommendations related to the level of percentage of the UPP that should be paid at those different thresholds. And what I think would be useful as I'm listening to the conversation this afternoon and the end of last Tuesday would be to put that one aside, like how much those UPP payments ought to be, what percentage of the impact tax they ought to be. Put that aside for right now, and let's get into the impact taxes. As we cover impact taxes, and you're going to hear, there'll be places where you do or don't want more information, but for some of those items of the impact tax that I think we can cover today, the council will come to a closer decision on, in general, what that impact tax might look like. And then that might be a good place to then go back and redecide about the UPPs, or maybe both things are put on hold. But if it's okay with everyone, there were a couple, what I would call most like technical or bookkeeping things with the UPP that I do think we could cover.
If I could interrupt just one time, just so someone who just happens to be tuning in just now, the UPP stands for Utilization Premium Payment. So
Yes.
yeah, we keep using the initials, but somebody has to explain what it is, please.
Okay, yes. So, and the utilization premium payment is the payment that's made when a school service area is inadequate. So there would be a payment made at 105% or over at one level, 120%, a different UPP at a higher level would then be levied, and then at 135%, a third tier UPP or utilization premium payment would be levied at a different amount. Aside from what those amounts should be or percentages of the impact tax they should be, the one thing that we didn't cover at the end of the last session is how the funds get used. So aside from like amount, I think the committee could consider, council could consider how the funds are used. And the committee was unanimous on this. And what they specified was that they wanted the utilization premium payments to be spent on any school facility capital project at the same school level that the funds were collected at, as long as it adds capacity to alleviate the overutilization in that school service area. It's a little different wording than we've had in the past with the school facility payment, but it really allows some flexibility to MCPS, and it just assures that whatever reasons the funds were collected, the funds will be used to alleviate that overcrowding.
Okay.
Is there
any objection on that discussion? Silence is golden, so we're good. That is without
Okay.
objection.
The one thing we didn't talk about in committee, we ran out of time. I think at that work session that day, there was a reason why the streaming had to get cut at that time. We didn't talk about what would be exempt from these utilization premium payments. I don't know if it's the will to talk about that now or put that off. The planning board had recommended that only the MPDUs, moderately priced dwelling units, be exempt from the required payment on that unit. Otherwise, it would be charged. We can hold off on this or have a discussion.
What is the will of the council?
Okay,
Which section is this, Pam, that you're referring to?
I'm sorry.
page number,
Which
please.
section?
Oh.
I'm
On page 27 of the staff report.
Page 27 of Part 1.
Part 1.
If I could just add one clarification for the record, Jason Sartori with the Planning Department. With the Planning Board's recommendation was to exempt not just MPDUs but other affordable units. So the same affordable units that are exempt from impact taxes. There are several different classifications. Would be exempt from the UPP, but that would be the only exemption.
Okay. Any comments from the council?
All right, sorry. There's just been a lot going on. I think we're all getting up to speed here in these packets. So, Pam, can you just restate we're on the bottom of page 27, the Fed committee recommendation about the timing of the payment.
Well, we're a little bit above it. It's really about it's between the timing of the payment and and how the funds should be used. What we didn't cover were the exemptions. So we specified the funds had to get used to alleviate the overcrowding in the school service area for which they are collected. But it is typical to exempt certain either geographic areas or certain types of housing from the requirement for these payments. And obviously MPDUs are one, all affordable units. We actually have a list of 4 different types of affordable housing that are in the impact tax code that we exempt. And so what this would be is exempt utilization premium payments from the same group of affordable housing that we exempt the impact tax. The question before you is, do you want to also exempt other places that you end up exempting from impact taxes? And I guess that can be covered later once you go through those other exemptions, for example, enterprise zones or opportunity zones.
And might I add, on the opportunity zones and enterprise zones, as was stated at the committee meetings, the joint committee meeting, I actually have a piece of property that's involved in an enterprise zone or an opportunity zone in Gaithersburg. Not that it's at this point is active for development, but because of that, I do have a conflict. I've checked with Mr. Drummer, and I will be recusing myself when we talk about the opportunity zones or enterprise zones. But based on that, not based on what I just said, but based on what you just said, Ms. Dunn, for the one requirement, I guess the Fed committee recommended the amount of payment should be based on the rates in effect at the time of the payment is made. Mm-hmm. Is that a problem for someone that wants to build? Going into a project, if they don't know for sure how much they would be having to pay for that, is that something that would be okay with them? I'm asking. I don't know.
So that's not unusual, and it's something similar that we do with impact taxes. All it means is we will have the rate schedule come through. It'll be the same rate schedule the council will approve for impact taxes. And we know that every 2 years, those rates get modified by a construction cost index. They get updated for inflation. And sometimes they decrease. There's been deflationary pressures. And the development community is aware of that. They know that on a biennial basis, these rates can be adjusted. The adjustments are usually fairly small based on that. And all that means is, so you might be going to get your approval in 2020, and you might not be going for your building permit till 2022, but you will pay the rate that's in effect in 2022. It may have increased slightly based on the rate of inflation or something else. That's all.
I just wanted to be clear on that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Pam, are we talking about when and how the UPP should be collected?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, first we were talking about exemptions, but I think that we'll put a pin in that since we didn't really hear much conversation or questions about it. We can cover it when we cover other exemptions for the impact taxes. So then we are talking about how and when it's paid. And the committee was unanimous in this recommendation as well. Their recommendation was that the UPP is required as a condition of approval and it's paid at the time of building permit, but subject to that condition that was made at the day they were approved.
Okay. So we'll come back to the question of, for example, if we were to exempt opportunity zones from impact taxes, are they still charged a utilization premium payment?
Right.
We'll come back to that later. Okay.
Yep.
Now we're at when and how should they be collected, and the Fed committee recommended. Pam?
Yes, the committee recommended that the amount of the UPP is collected at the building permit, regardless of whether or not there's a change in the condition of the school service area at that time. It's the condition is placed at the time you get your approval.
Right. And if you look on the bottom of page 27 of the packet, that is what is there.
Okay.
Okay.
Is that without objection? All right. We are not objecting. Go ahead, please.
All right, we are going to
Go
move them
quickly before we start objecting.
I'm going to talk really fast.
Yeah, okay.
The next section you have in your packet, you do have a history of impact taxes for Montgomery County Public Schools. That's been included just for, it's really to help some of the newer council members or just in reference in general. How has this topic been handled in the past? How have they been levied? There were a couple tables that were presented with that information. They're on, for me anyway, the way I printed it is page 29. They have revenue from impact taxes since 2013, and below that is based on funding source, how much of the MCPS FY21 through 26 CIP is covered by impact taxes and by school impact taxes. That's there for you in that chart. It's, according to this chart, it's about 7% of MCPS's CIP is covered by school impact taxes. So that's historical, it's information if there's any questions on it. Otherwise, we'll move into talking about how the tax is calculated.
Any objection? Let's move on, please.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, can I make this geo, excuse me, can I, since this is mostly the geo sort of work. So for my colleagues, we're moving through pages 28 to 41 in the packet. So we did, the GEO committee did meet on October 9th and 12th to discuss those, the following impact taxes, these related items that Ms. Dunn is going to present and Mr. Orland. We did come to unanimous agreements on all the items that we reviewed, except for the Opportunity Zones Enterprise Zone item, where, as you heard already, Council President Katz recused himself. So it was unanimous for those of us who could vote on that particular item. There were two items that we did not make recommendations on. The first was Councilmember Jawanda's proposal to provide a school impact tax credit of 40% for 2-bedroom multifamily units and a credit of 50% for 3-bedroom multifamily units built in infill school impact areas. This was an item that we felt we needed to receive a little bit more information so we can, remember that as we're moving through the packet. The second item was the recordation tax proposal from the Planning Board. And as I stated from the very beginning, and it was a topic of conversation during that session, we wanted to move through the SSB committee work sessions as well as some of these straw votes to understand where we are landing. I know that there is a chart that has been shared already with some of those decisions and then kind of like what that entails vis-a-vis, do we have certain deficits, what decisions were made for perhaps very important one that the committee also took regarding 40% discount in the highly desired growth areas. What does that mean? What is the impact? So that we can then do some sort of a reconciliation and then make a decision as a body, which again, I think goes to this conversation about vision and what it is that we're trying to do with this exercise. And that's why we decided to ask staff to first go through this exercise, look at where we are landing, what is some of that so-called reconciliation table, if you will, and then give us particular scenarios so that we can react. Before we get into the specifics of the GEO recommendations, I will point out, and we will talk about this again in terms of the Opportunity Zone Enterprise Zone item. I know we received just today an email from Mr. Orland. I just want to share very briefly that literally when I ran for this seat, one of the biggest conversation and most important issues for the residents of District 4, which at that time covered the part of the East County, was a concern that, yes, we were fortunate to have a lot of market affordable residential housing units, but what we didn't have was really the type of amenities, the kind of jobs, the type of companies that could be located in this part of the county to provide the jobs, that provide opportunities for residents in this area so they can access those jobs, and the absolute lack of amenities. And a lot of that was driven by the fact that, and we all know that because we've had these conversations many times, that, many commercial possibility, whether it's retail, restaurants, et cetera, would say, oh, the market doesn't really support this. The market doesn't really, can support the kind of amenities that the residents in District 4 wanted. And so the notion of this conversation of Opportunity Zone vis-a-vis more NPDUs, I just want to share with my colleagues that for this area of the county, for the Mid and East County, I can only speak about this area. The one thing the residents, my constituents, still continue to want is to see more, activated job centers, activity zones, opportunities for amenities, infrastructure, etc. There is no clamoring for more affordable housing here, because the sentiment and the reality, if you look at the data, is that we do have a lot of market affordable housing. And we've made decisions through some of our master plans, for example, the Glenmont master plan, where we preserved the market affordable housing. We did not upzone those multifamily units because we understand that it's important to preserve. But what we need to do is continue to figure out ways to incentivize the construction of, amenities or redevelopment that brings that. So I wanted to share that because this is not an one size fits all necessarily. And when we get to this conversation, I hope that you will remember this. And again, I'm talking about the mid part of the county and the east part of the county as a very important tool to continue to push through things like the Viva White Oak Master Plan, continue to, work on areas like Wheaton, like Glenmont, where we already began to invest and understand that what is needed in this area, it's really a matter of amenities, jobs, that kind of destinations that many of our young people, mostly people of color as well, most young people of color don't even have access to job opportunities, to internships, et cetera, because they're just not located there. So I wanted to share that because, again, I think especially for my newer colleagues, this has been an issue that has been discussed ad nauseum in this part of the county. It's what voters have expressed they want. And we need to understand that, not every area is exactly the same. So with that, this was the discussion in the GO committee, and I appreciate the Councilmember Joanna, Councilmember Reamer, et cetera, also joined us in some of these discussions as well. Thank you. Ms. Dunn.
Thank you. Ms. Beck, please.
Yes, I did want to just comment. I wanted to point out in the addendum, there's some information that we have provided to council staff. And I do believe in the end that council will probably end up in a place that does not end up taking a lot of money out of the CIP. But I do have some concerns because this is a very complex thing, as we've noted, and there can be some unintended consequences. And I think the other kind of major point I'd like to make is that for me, when I see dollars going down, I see real projects. And so a lot of the information that we've provided to you, I think it starts probably around circle 9 or so in the addendum, sort of presents information about the projects that could be paid for with some of the things that we're giving up. I think it's very easy sometimes to say, oh, it's only $1 million a year, but it adds up over time and it adds up into money worth additions at elementary schools and those types of things. Right now, when we look at the changes in the rates and even adding in the UPPs, we would be losing about $71 million over 6 years. And with the UPPs, as I've mentioned before, we can't really program that money till we know we have it in hand and we know we have a project we can use it for. We sometimes end up sitting around with that money not being spent because there's not an eligible project. Then we'd be down about $85 million based on where we are with committee rates right now. I think the other thing is that with the regional rates, we've sort of had an assumption that high impact tax rates disincentivize development. And if that happens in the scheme we have now, then we won't have Clarksburg to make up for the significant reductions in other parts of the county. So I think that those are some of the concerns that we have. I think also it's interesting that there's definitely this notion that developers are paying more than their fair share. And while you can look at an individual situation, that may end up being true, but when you look at it in aggregate, it does not appear to be true. The 7% mentioned by Ms. Dunn is understated because there's some things in there that aren't eligible for impact taxes. But when I look at some of the projects that are, it's more like 11%. So, I mean, that is also probably a little understated, but I'm just not sure that that notion holds up. I think this may end up getting discussed another day, but one of the things we've talked about is with the opportunity zones, is that going to have a perverse impact on MPDUs? One of the things as staff that we're trying to look at is, are there any 25% MPDU exemptions in enterprise zones? And so far, what we're finding is there's only an HOC project. So if that might be a harbinger of what we get, we might instead want to say to opportunity zones, hey, do the MPDU exemption, because that meets more of our goal.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, and
No.
but one last
please.
thing. Okay, one last thing. And it is somewhat complicated, but there are charts at the back. I'm happy to talk to people if it's confusing, that state aid, our ability to match state aid is a potential problem.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. First of all, I think it's important, just as a basic framework, that the county council come out of this SSP raising more money, than the existing policy does. At the least, we'd want to just break even, but I don't think we should raise less money than we are currently raising. And I certainly won't support a policy in the end, when you put all the pieces together, that is going to produce less revenue for our school construction program and our other critical capital needs. Secondly, so I just wanted, that's a kind of an overall response and a concern. I hear what Mary Beth is saying. Secondly, on impact taxes, we're heading into the part where we actually may want to put more towards the end of the line. We could have some discussion about these items, but I do think we wanted to get through everything where there was more consensus, and then return to those things that are, for votes that are less. So we ought to proceed here, figure out and discuss things, but keep moving so that we can get through everything else as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Ms.
The
Dunn.
GO items that we're going to discuss were all unanimous in terms of committee. So hopefully that is a signal that it should not be as controversial. The couple of items we did not take is because we needed more information and it was not as straightforward. So I think that what we're proceeding with now should follow that.
Thank you. Ms. Dunn, please.
Great, thank you. So we're going to head into a discussion of the calculation of the impact tax. In the packet, it was broken down into 4 different parts because there are multiple things going on in the recommendations for impact tax.
Ma'am, if you could point out where in the packet you're.
On my printed version, I think sometimes these are a little different for different people's printers, but I'm on page 30.
Okay.
So the first has to do with, and again, this has already been covered, that we currently have an impact tax that's countywide, and it's applied by structure type because we know that different structure types generate different levels of students, and it covers all 3 school levels in that one impact tax. So it takes the structure type, it looks at the students generated at the elementary, middle, and high. It looks at the student seat cost at the elementary, middle, and high, combines those things and puts them together, and that's your impact tax rate. The planning board's recommendation is to move from having a countywide impact tax to one that is based on these school impact areas, and that's pretty much been covered, and everyone's in agreement for now on the school impact areas, and to have a regional impact tax. This place, and this is where the packet has the most recent GO committee recommendation, which again was unanimous, was to calculate the school impact tax based on 100% of the student seat cost. Prior to 2016, it was calculated based on 90% of the student seat cost. In 2016, it went to 120%, and then the school facility payment, very similar to the utilization premium payment, was discontinued. So sort of moving back to a different framework that we had before. And the committee was unanimously in agreement with 100% of the cost of a student seat.
Okay. That without objection? Thank you. Nope, yeah, okay. I saw a thumbs up rather than a hand up. Go ahead, please.
Okay. The next part was that also in the planning board draft was a discount to be applied in these desired growth and investment areas for duplex, townhouse, and multifamily development for the impact tax. It was a 40% discount. And as I mentioned, currently impact taxes are countywide. And using these student generation rates, really the regional rates gets at a more refined and context-sensitive school impact tax. So in discussing this at length with the committee, they unanimously also agreed not to promote or support the discount to desired growth areas, as they felt that the school impact tax was covering 100% cost of the student seat, and it was taking into account not just variations based on structure type, but variations in student generation based on location. So it did not need an additional locational discount associated with it.
Okay. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you, Council President. Colleagues should have received, and I believe was included in the addendum, comments about it as well. A proposal that I have put forward related to the desired growth and investment areas, but not focus on the school side of it. I share the interest and the thought process that the planning board put forward. I think that they found the wrong mechanism for it by providing a discount for schools. The desired growth and investment areas have nothing to do with schools, and a student costs the same regardless of whether or not they're in one of these areas or they are not. But the reason why they're desired growth and investment areas from my perspective and my understanding is specifically because they are in areas that either currently have or we are planning for them to have or we desire for them to have access to transportation infrastructure, bus rapid transit, et cetera. And so providing the desired growth and investment areas to achieve the interests that the planning board was trying to do in the manner that it was more connected to, which is transportation connected and related to provide more housing and more investment in areas that have proximity to current and future planned county transit projects, I think was the right approach to do it. It provides the same 40% discount, but the fiscal impact is significantly different because some of those areas already are covered by lower impact taxes on transportation already. Red policy areas, including in the purple line areas, the opportunity zones, if we move forward with that proposal as well. And so what this would do is maintain the remaining. If you look at some of the impacts of many of the decisions that we're making, there are certain areas where we want that missing middle type of housing and higher density than currently exists, but not quite the multifamily, which has received the significant bulk of the benefits of this plan and the movements of this plan with regard to impact taxes. I think that this reflects our historic interest in smart growth development. It's more consistent with the rest of the policy and the way that we've handled transportation impact taxes related to other aspects of the policy and to our school impact taxes. And I just wanted to raise that. I don't know if it'll be a decision point today, if we'll move this forward on another day, but it is, while not part of schools, related to this particular recommendation because basically takes the similar idea that the planning board put forward, but what I think is a much better and more consistent and rational approach as part of the broader policy.
Thank you. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. Great. Well, I attended this part of the session, and I did express my support at the time for the planning board's recommendation. I appreciate Councilmember Friedson's, revision or amendment to the committee's recommendation that goes closer to what the planning board had recommended. I wanted to just start off by reiterating, refreshing us on something because it has taken me quite a few, explanations to get this insight. There's a big difference here between mapping of desired growth areas and the student generation mapping, which is the greenfield turnover infill. One of the major goals of the planning board's policy was to really make the projected student enrollment of a given context, to set the impact tax rates to the actual student generation of a given context of the county. So to simplify, 100 housing units in one part of the county generates so many students, in another part of the county generates a different level of students, and in another part of the county generates a different level of students. Greenfield generates far more students because families are just flocking to the greenfields. That's what they love. Like they love Clarksburg. It's like it's a bounty of children. It's not as intense. It's not as concentrated in infill and turnover. So they had sort of tiered the county into these 3 tiers based on the actual generation of students in these tiers, and then had recommended that we first of all set rates according to those tiers. So we've been discussing that a bit. And then separately, the planning board recommended a discount factor, which is the desired growth layer. But it's a very different issue than the first issue, which was let's set the tax rate according to the student generation rate. So I don't know if I don't know who needs to hear that, as the saying goes, but I certainly did. I have several times, and it's taken me several times to, get fluent in it. So in any event, what Councilmember Friedson is recommending doesn't really change the greenfield infill turnover student generation based impact tax calculation. It is as he explained, addressing this other layer of a discount on impact taxes. I think that, and the planning board had recommended a general discount of all impact taxes in desired growth areas, recognizing that the impact taxes appear to be preventing us from getting the housing that we want. And that was the rationale for it. I think Councilmember Friedson's idea is as good as far as it goes, and I support it. I do want to know if colleagues are interested in something that's closer to the planning board model. We don't have to decide that at all. I don't have a proposal to offer at all, but I just want to put it out there, and we can, keep chewing on things as we go. So I speak in favor of the amendment, and just put on the table, additional conversation as we go. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Beck.
Yes, just one thing. When we looked at the number of units in the pipeline, in the designated growth areas, there were over 80% of the units were already there. So it doesn't feel like we need to incentivize them to come. And I think there's a notion that these more urbanized areas have lesser cost projects, but we've got huge ambitions in terms of what we want to do with bikeways. And in the addendum, there's a list of several projects, but there are many more that could use impact taxes. And so that's my concern.
Thank you. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. President. I share that concern, and fortuitous Ms. Beck came before me. I think the idea that we would give further impact tax discounts or breaks for areas that are already seeing the majority of the development, and where there are project needs. I think the bike lane is one of many potential project needs where you could use this money to make improvements that would benefit the community. So I think the right decision was made to not do this, and I don't think we should move in that direction, even if it is a more modest or slightly modified proposal, as Mr. Friedson put forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarro.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I believe that, the GO committee was able to strike a good balance there. I think the issue of the school impact was important, and we, felt that a student generated is a student generated. I believe that if I'm looking at the chart, that was about $66 million roughly. Even though I would be open to examining the version of the proposal that Councilmember Friedson is putting forth. I do have some concerns regarding the needs that we have for revenue there. So, I mean, I might support a version of this. I have to take a little bit more time to understand that. But I do think that the decision that we made regarding the school impact tax was an appropriate one. And, you know, I'm going to continue to support that decision that the GO committee made. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Orland.
I was just going to ask, do you want to talk about Mr. Friedson's proposal today, or do you want to put it off till the next meeting?
Well, the next person we're going to talk to is Councilmember Friedson.
Okay.
Councilmember Friedson, what is your desire on that?
I'm open to talking about it today. I'm open to moving it off. I kind of yield to colleagues on that. I just wanted to point out one quick thing. I share everything that Councilmember Navarro just said. I just want to be very clear. I don't think that this is a departure from the GO committee's recommendation and decision, which I think was very consistent and very important. And I was, very firm in the decision that I made and that we made as a committee. I think that it is in line with that we wanted to be consistent with other things that we have done here, that there wasn't a nexus with school student generation, that it was, this was one departure from other areas of the policy. This was a proposal and is a proposal that reflects what the planning board was attempting to do, where I thought that they looked at it in the wrong place, where there is no nexus to school and student generation, and there is a direct nexus to transportation. I'll just point out, in 2016, in the prior SSP, significant discounts were provided to green and yellow policy areas. It was from what was originally proposed by the planning board. It was originally a factor of 2.0 for green. It was dropped down to a factor of 1.25. I believe yellow, and Dr. Orland can correct me if I'm wrong, was 1.5, dropped to 1.25.
You're correct.
Yeah, thank you. And that made it less expensive. It wasn't based on the data. The planning board's proposal was based on vehicle miles traveled and other factors. It was based on, it was a lot. It was expensive, and we wanted to discount it to a rate that was more palatable. I think that has an impact. I think, one way to do this is to completely go back and re-engineer and, totally undo those impact taxes based on the vehicle miles traveled data and the other aspects of the capital budget and the capital budget needs. Certainly that would be another option to do this. I thought this, for the sake of colleagues who are already overwhelmed by this, and since Ms. Dunn and Dr. Orland already have plenty of work to do, I thought that was a bit of too ambitious of a request and an undertaking for this moment in time. This proposal is a much more modest proposal to address the same issue, to be more consistent with our smart growth policies. And the last thing that I will say is, in order to make our transportation multimodal want it to work, we need to create the type of housing and the type of activity centers and the type of development along those corridors. And historically, previously, we only focused on Metro in any significant way as part of this type of policy, in terms of trying to incentivize, that type of development. Now we've expanded that to Metro and to Purple Line stations, and we're going to, take some votes later today related to that. We're moving forward related to that. But our future in transportation is really in bus, and buses are transit, and that's bus rapid transit, and that's local bus service that feeds into bus rapid transit, and that feeds into the Metro and the Purple Line. And this will allow us to transition into that effort to incentivize this type of smart growth development that we talk a lot about. It is a far more modest way to do it, but we should be consistent. If we say we're for smart growth, if we say we want to create the type of corridors as part of the general plan, if we want to create the type of bus rapid transit and local bus network, as we frequently talk about, we have to have policies that actually make that possible. I don't think this is ambitious. I think that it's modest, but I think this moves us modestly in the right direction, and I would hope that we could move forward with it.
Okay. Councilmember Vice President Hooker.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the sentiment behind this. There's lots of ways we facilitate smart growth. I'm a little nervous about the transportation CIP, just thinking ahead to a few months from now when we'll be in those hearings. We have a very full CIP now that likely will be facing budget cuts. It's chock full of projects that we all like and we'd like to see more of that are expensive bikeways and bike share programs and sidewalks and many other things. And I'm nervous about its long-term, the revenue for it to be. So anyway, I think we're going to have more cuts than we want to begin with, and that's one reason I am nervous about this proposal.
Thank you, Councilmember Albornoz.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate, again, the thoughtful deliberation that occurred within the GO committee in this, and I understand in principle where Councilmember Friedson is going with this. This came over yesterday afternoon, and so it would be good to hear a little bit about the planning board's reaction to this proposal. And I would love to give them a little bit more time to process and assess and come back with their evaluation. I do share the concern about the next CIP, which is going to be painful to say the least. And there are already many construction projects and infrastructure and capital projects that we weren't able to get to last year. And that it isn't going to be any easier to get to moving forward. But if we offset, in some ways, then I'm open to it. I just would love to hear a little bit more from the planning board's perspective, the pros and cons, and their evaluation and assessment of this specific proposal. And council staff as well. Yeah.
Can I just clarify that the GO committee did not take Councilmember Friedson's proposal? We made that decision of not accepting the planning board's proposal on the school impact tax piece, but we have not had the opportunity to discuss Councilmember Friedson's proposal. So it is, it is a new proposal, and I think that it has merit in terms of understanding the impact. I think and Councilmember Reamer can talk to that. I think there's also going to be some, conversation in terms of the metro policy areas as well, and some of the exemptions there for transportation impact taxes. So there is some nexus to that as well. But we have not discussed this particular proposal and the GO committee.
Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate that.
Could I just one more clarification? I appreciate the comment. It didn't come over yesterday. It was sent around to colleagues on the 26th. So I just wanted to note that, and we did share it with council staff, and we did share it with the planning board prior to that. So it did come over 4 days ago, but not before the GO committee proposal was subsequent to the recommendation. Like I said, it is completely in keeping with the philosophy behind what the GO committee did and why the GO committee decided to do it.
Thank you. Mr. Anderson, are you prepared at this point to comment, or would you prefer to wait to comment?
If you don't mind, I just want to jump into a couple things. I do think that Councilmember Friedson's proposal is entirely consistent with the planning board's thinking when we proposed the reduction on the school impact tax rates. The reason I didn't really push back very hard when the committee rejected that recommendation was I had to acknowledge that a school seat costs what a school seat costs, whether you're in Clarksburg or you're in some other part of the county. And the proposal that was on the table would have reduced impact tax rates in certain places for schools in a way that was not related to their costs. This, I think, by contrast, as Councilman Friedson points out, is based on the data that shows there is less vehicle miles traveled per household, dramatically less vehicle miles traveled per household in the orange areas as well as the red areas near the metro, and therefore a reduced rate is justified by the data. And what we heard from the committee was, we don't like your school impact tax reduction because it's not tied to the data. This is tied to the data. The second thing I want to point out is that part of the reason that the committee had balked at the idea of the greenfield rates being applied and the greenfield concept for moratorium being applied in Clarksburg was the idea that we need to make sure that housing remains affordable in Clarksburg. Well, I'm not sure how you can justify reducing the rate for Clarksburg on the theory you want housing to be affordable there, but not reduce the rate in the smart growth areas, like in the orange areas as well as the red areas, where the transportation costs are less. Because really, I have nothing against housing in Clarksburg, and I think some of those points are well taken, and I have no issue with the committee's decision. But in order to be consistent with the idea that costs should be related to the impact payments, I think a reduction in the orange areas along the lines Councilmember Friedson has suggested, as he said, is not only entirely consistent with what the planning board did, but it's consistent with the committee's thinking as to why they didn't accept the planning board's recommendation about the school impact. And I mean, we can develop some more information about what the effect of this is on revenue. We can be prepared to talk about that the next time. But the short answer is we think this is entirely consistent, not only with the planning board's earlier proposal, but also the committee's thinking in setting that proposal aside.
Okay. Councilmember Albornoz, did you have anything else in addition?
Maybe just the fiscal impact, but I think, in terms of just on the merits and the policy, that's super helpful. And this conversation's been very helpful. But need to process this a little bit more, but I think this is very helpful.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson, did you have anything else in addition?
No, I think that would work. I think coming back with the fiscal analysis, I think the comparison, to the original planning board suggestion of the 66 million, which is, what the initial thought would be helpful as well as we talk about the planning board proposal versus the committee recommendations versus where we end up. That's really, some of the puts and takes of what we're talking about here. So I would appreciate that and hope that we can, once we have that information, take straw vote on the proposal.
Okay. Councilmember Reamer and then Dr. Worland.
Thank you. Okay, so yeah, I certainly don't think we need to have a vote right now. I was speaking in favor of the amendment, but not necessarily asserting that we should vote now. I think it makes sense to have two bites at the apple discussion-wise. I am very open to reconsidering the planning board's general framework. Maybe their numbers weren't right. Maybe their discount factors weren't right. If there's an appetite for that, I think Andrew's, amendment here moves in the right direction. I did want to make a very general comment about, yes, the development that we're getting is in the desired growth areas. That's not the issue. The issue is the development that we're getting is much less significant than the development that we need and that we want. That's the issue. And I think the planning board's recommendation on desired growth was trying to tackle that problem, that we have a hump that is too high for projects to get over based on a lot of economic factors. So that was the issue. The planning board was trying to change the economics of development, make it work, get our housing market going again, increasing the supply, having all the beneficial effects of redevelopment in all kinds of areas, in these desired growth areas. So recognizing that there is a concern about the fiscal impact, we would be moving away from the idea that we would collect 100% of the impact of the cost. We would be moving away from that in favor of a number of other public benefits we're seeking. The planning board also recommended a tool to raise substantially more money than we would be giving up, which is the recreation tax. To lay it out there. That was their approach. They said, hey, we think you ought to reduce impact taxes broadly because it's having a deleterious effect on the housing market and on all of your redevelopment goals. And given that most of the students are coming out of existing housing, we think you ought to shift your financing to the recordation tax. That it would all fit together. And I like that general framework. I think it makes sense, so I just leave that there. I think we don't have to vote now. I think there's a lot to think about and a lot to discuss. Thanks.
Thank you. And
Just a point of
Dr. Orland.
clarification.
Please,
Just a point of clarification. Yeah, I think when Mr. Anderson was describing the issue, the committee has, I guess, the outstanding question regarding the different rates for greenfield, infill, and turnover vis-a-vis Clarksburg, for example. The committee, had made a particular decision about that. I think there is interest within the council for a different approach, but I just wanted to kind of state that this was not the committee that had, not made a decision, et cetera. But I think that's one of the pieces that we're probably going to be discussing pretty soon.
Thank you, Dr. Orland.
Thank you. OMB has done a fiscal impact of this. There's their estimate looking at the residential pipeline of development in the areas that this discount would apply, Mr. Friesen's discount would apply, would be forego about $60 million worth of revenue over the next 10 years, or about $6 million a year. There are three issues, though, with that. One is that it underestimates the amount, and that this only looked at the residential pipeline. Of course, the transportation impact tax looks at both the residential and non-residential development, so there's really more development involved. Secondly, it only looks at the current pipeline. It doesn't look at development that will be coming forward that's not yet been approved by the planning board. But in the other direction, this is all gross revenue that the OMB was looking at, and we know from transportation impact taxes that there can be sizable credits given to developers, and based on their actually constructing transportation improvements, they get a dollar for dollar credit. So we don't have a specific number as to what it would be. It could be north of $6 million a year. It could be somewhat south of $6 million a year. But that's what we have so far, and that's in today's addendum.
Thank you,
Councilmember. And we'll talk about this at a later time.
Thank you, Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I'd love to, when we come back to it, have planning take a look at what the executive branch sent over, what's in the packet as was requested by Councilmember Albornoz. And I also think that it's important that planning weigh in as the folks who are actually responsible for this on behalf of the county that we appoint to do this work, to address the notion that we have heard repeatedly throughout this process that we should not have any type of changes or incentives in particular areas, because the areas where we want growth to happen is the area where it's already happening. It defies almost every other conversation this council has had over the last 2 years in terms of whether or not we're getting the type of housing development and economic activity that we want, particularly in the places where we want it. And I think as we continue moving forward on this proposal and on all of the proposals, opportunity zones and otherwise, we really ought to have the planning board specifically weigh in on that issue and provide their thoughts and feedback, because it is a consistent refrain that we keep hearing, and it is, I think, something that the planning board would want to weigh in on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. President. I guess I just wanted to ask if we're done with the discussion. I mean, we do have a committee recommendation,
yes,
unrelated to the transportation proposal. So I don't know how you wanted to.
I was going to thank you.
That. And I don't know if there are other people that want to talk about it. I was just curious about.
No, thank you. At this point, there are no others for this moment. Watch this space. But I'm going to turn back to Ms. Dunn, and she will lead us back through the committee recommendations. Please.
Great, thank you. Listening to what Councilmember Navarro just said, I think we at least want to, without objection, the removal of the desired growth an investment area discount related to school impact taxes.
Okay, is that without objection? Yes, yes, that is without objection.
We will.
Oh, wait. We might have one objection.
I think Councilmember Reed noted.
I've been
Well, my
speaking against
objection
it for
just
like
appeared.
15 minutes.
What'd you say?
I've been objecting without saying I object, for quite a while. My recommendation was that we come back to this. If that's not the council president's, desire, then, but I have been suggesting we take another look at this and keep moving, because Andrew's got this proposal here that is related.
Well, I don't see the relationship, but
Yeah.
Yeah, could I just, I was only pointing out that the same philosophical approach the planning board was attempting to do, I have proposed something that I believe achieves the same desired outcome without an inconsistency in the way that we address school generation and school impact. I don't see it as related. I am very comfortable. I stand by the committee's, firmly behind the committee's recommendation, and I'm very comfortable putting this particular item to bed and then separately addressing whether or not the council would like to address the planning board's desired outcome, which I believe we should and feel very strongly that we should, that I believe is separate from this recommendation and separate from the decision, and then frankly consistent with the decision that the committee made on this particular item.
And that is where I am. Go ahead.
I don't think I have the votes here, so I'll let it go. I don't want to object, and we can keep going.
Okay, thank you. So, Ms. So with this, the first one, if you could please restate it.
Yes, the first was that the committee unanimously supported removing the discount for the desired growth and investment areas as it relates to the school impact tax.
And is that without objection, or Councilmember Reamer, are you objecting?
Sorry, I was still. I was going to respond to a text message. Could you repeat that, please?
Sure.
Are you objecting to what? You want to do it a third time, Ms. Dunn, please?
Yes, this is simply restating that the unanimous decision of the GO committee to not support the discount for the desired growth and investment areas as it relates to the school impact tax.
Yeah, I thought we just did that. Okay.
We're just making sure everyone's moving on from that.
So that's without objection a couple times. Okay, go ahead, please.
Okay. We are not going to then take the straw vote on Councilmember Friedson's
That
alternative
is correct.
as we are waiting for more
Councilmember
information.
Friedson agrees with that. Okay.
Right. And then next, we'll move on to, there was a component of the calculation of the impact tax that retained 120% cost of a student seat in the agricultural reserve zone. And the committee, under the same philosophy of looking at the county-wide school impact tax costs per student seat and doing 100% for all the other places in the county, unanimously agreed that for the ag reserve, a student seat cost should also be at 100%.
And is that without objection? Yes, that is without objection.
Yeah.
And actually makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Great. Moving on, we are now covering, there's a surcharge that currently exists for somebody that is building a home that is larger than 3,500 square feet. So per square foot, $2 charge if your home you are constructing is larger than 3,500 square feet. And planning staff took some time and they did a great evaluation of existing homes, size of homes, and students generated from those homes. You know, their ability to now look at student generation from a variety of ways, you know, looking at it geographically, looking at it by type of home, and this by size of home was really amazing. And what it showed was that there was no discernible difference in the number of students coming out of very large homes. And in fact, when they looked at some of the data, there were actually fewer students coming out of these extremely large homes. And so the committee unanimously voted to not retain having a surcharge on the construction of these homes, since they aren't showing that they produce more students that are affecting the school system.
Thank you. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Ms. Dunn, for introducing this item. I'm going to talk for a little while, and will say from the onset that, any questions I might have, Ms. Dunn, feel free to respond. Mr. Sartori feel free to hop in, or anybody else from planning, perhaps Chair Anderson or anyone else. First question I have is, how much of the county is designated as turnover zones in this SSP? When we're talking about housing, right? I don't think we discussed percentages. And so from a baseline of this conversation, I'm curious about the turnover zones and how much is designated that.
Sure. So I can say we haven't recalculated it since there have been some changes to the designations, but with the initial planning board recommendation, it was about 89% of the county's land area that fell into the turnover.
Okay. So, sure. And we've been having this conversation, and some of that has changed a little bit, but an overwhelming majority, right? 80 something, 89% or so. Thank you for that. So what is the average house? What is the new house? Sorry, specifically, what does a new house in the turnover area look like? Let me rephrase the question. What does growth for single family homes in the turnover area look like? What are we talking about?
Lisa Gavoni, for the record, I can pull that up. I can pull up the average size of a new house in Montgomery County right now if you give me a second.
Well, and while Ms. Gavoni is pulling that information up, I will just say, taking a look at what we had, so it was basically 88.9% of the county fell into the turnover impact area. About 28% of the housing growth that we've seen in the county came out of that area. So it's not that we're not seeing any new housing growth in the turnover area. It's just not the predominant impactor of enrollment, right? So over the 5-year period that we looked at, the turnover area had just over 7,200.
Mr. Sartori, I'm going to ask you to hold off. I'm not at that point yet. I'm trying to get a better understanding of what we're talking about.
Sure.
Sure. So the average size of a new single-family detached home, and again, this isn't infill or turnover, but the entire county, I don't have just a turnover, but it's most of the county is about 3,700 square feet.
Okay. And so this particular item is the surcharge for any homes over 3,500 square feet, and you're saying that the average home now is about 3,700 square feet.
Yes.
Okay. How much of an impact tax is paid on such a home, on the average home there?
Well, the current rate on a single-family detached house is $26,000.
Okay. What about a house that is rebuilt or significantly expanded, which I've called a newly rebuilt home?
If you even completely tear down a house and rebuild it, if you rebuild it within a year, there's no difference in the charge. You're not charged for a new home. The home existed before, and you replaced it, and so there's no change. If you wait longer than a year, we're going to cover this in a little bit because there's some a recommendation related to this further in the packet. But if you wait longer than a year to construct your new residence, you are charged that $26,000.
You're correct, Ms. Dunn, and I was trying to figure out when to bring this topic into the conversation, but this came first, so I'm entering it into now, and it will pop up later, but I'll use my time mostly to talk about it now because it is relevant to this point. And so in the memo, in the packet, we see that school overcrowding over the next 4 years serve areas where there's little or no development over the last 2 decades. And for example, there are several schools and neighborhoods in the 2817 zip code that will be significantly overcrowded in the coming years. Yet that zip code has had very little new growth or any new construction really since 2000. However, that zip code 2817 in the same time has seen more than 1,000 newly constructed homes. And those homes that were built after tearing down the original structures. And so the 1,000 homes or so are the equivalent of a new community of large single-family detached homes. That's the context that we're talking about. And according to the planning department's own numbers, the average home that was torn down was built in 1948, is 1,700 square feet, and sells for $700,000. That's the planning board's own, planning department's own data. The home that replaces it after it's torn down is on average 4,200 square feet and sells for $1.75 million. Thus the relevancy to this conversation. And so we know that large swaths of our county, especially Down County, were constructed before 1986 when impact fees were instituted. And these communities are older. They still require significant school investment. Just look at our CIP and just listen to the conversation that we're having about additions and such, or rebuilding of new schools entirely. And we know that Montgomery County is a great place to live, which is why people are choosing to come to these well-established neighborhoods so their kids can go to school. And the more affordable new construction that we have among our single-family stock, it seems as part of this broader conversation that we've been asking, I think we actually delayed this vote, but we're determining how many new homes, also new homes in Up County, have to pay impact fees, while newly built homes in Down County don't. It's an equity issue for me. So we know that both new and old neighborhoods require schools. They require school additions, and everybody wants a new modern home, but we're treating them differently. In 2019, the Planning Board, on its blog titled The Third Place, had a piece called Housing Stock Snapshot. And in that piece, I'm going to quote it here: limited Down County development opportunities and the high demand for housing locations near public transportation and amenities has resulted in significant teardown of existing single-family home activity. The teardowns are a one-to-one replacement, so while there is no overall loss of housing units, the new units tend to be larger and more expensive than the older units, often replacing more affordable housing, starter homes. Based on this data, it continues, we see that the pressures of redevelopment for single-family and multifamily markets are different. The single-family market has responded to the lack of land for new development by tearing down existing single-family homes to create larger, more expensive homes. Ms. Giovanni might recall that document. In addition, it's my understanding that many of the older homes also tend to be rental. So in addition to tearing down homes that become larger, we are losing rental housing stock here as well. Another planning board document, this one from 2017, the planning department released the rental housing study. And one of the best practices, and that's what it says, quote, best practices in the planning department's rental housing study is, quote, while demolition taxes are rarer than other forms of developer impact fees, these taxes are getting a closer look in the hot housing markets where single family teardowns or the demolition of older apartment buildings are impacting the availability of affordable housing. So my question to Mr. Sartori or anybody else who would like to respond is, why have you not adopted your own agency's best practice and are no longer recommending impact fees on new homes or turnover areas?
Well, I would, we might have Chairman Anderson may want to add something here too, but I would just say that it's first, the impact taxes, and these are not ours, the planning departments or the planning boards to implement. All right, it's the county council that chooses to set these and implement them. With regard to these tear down rebuilds, we did take a really good close look at this, and what we found was that sure, these torn down homes were generating more students than the typical single-family home across the county. However, we also looked at recently sold homes that may not have torn down. The home, that 1947 home with 1,700 square feet, recently sold homes were generating even more students than the tear down rebuilt homes. And so from the perspective of the fact that we're getting a lot of students out of these tear downs is really no different than if the home had just sold. In fact, it's actually generating fewer students. So, and we've always throughout, in every single case, if you have, let's say, 3 single-family homes that come down and it gets replaced with 20 townhouses, my understanding is that DPS gives a credit for the 3 single-family homes, the impact that those 3 single-family homes, assuming that they were generating students, they get a credit for that, and then they get charged for the impact of the 20 townhouses that they're building. So there's always been that net impact basis. And so with a tear down rebuild, it's a net of loss of 1 single-family home and a gain of 1, so it's a net of 0.
Yeah, if I could just jump in, I think there's 2 separate issues here which need to be kept separate. The first issue, which is, I think, the issue that was where we are in the packet, was the planning board's recommendation to eliminate the surcharge on the larger houses. And that's because the data shows that at a certain point, a larger house doesn't actually generate more students. So on the principle that you shouldn't be charged a disproportionate payment if you're not creating a disproportionate part of the impact, we said there's just no data to support that policy anymore because we had a more refined analysis, more data available, and concluded it wasn't supported by the facts. The second issue is about whether or not to apply a impact tax to a teardown, where there's a 1-for-1 replacement. And as Jason is saying, the evidence showed teardowns are not what caused the additional student generation. It's the fact that teardowns, when they get tore down and there's a new house built, get sold. And just like every other house that's recently been sold, that tends to be associated with a new family moving in, which tends to be associated with students being generated. So I think Councilmember Glass's line of argument is actually a more aptly suited to increasing the recordation tax, not to to increasing impact fees on large houses or applying them to teardowns, because the data that we're talking about here shows that what drives school impact from single family houses, what in terms of what point in time they generate the students, is when were they last sold. A new house tends to generate a new student, but so does an old house that's been sold to a new owner.
Thank you for that, gentlemen. So the analysis that you're referring to, what were the years of your analysis?
It's in the, we make reference to this on page 99 of the planning board's draft, where recommendation 6.8, it was a review of homes built across it was 848 replacement homes that were built across the county between 2014 and 2018. And then we looked at the homes that were sold over that same time period.
So the student generation data that you're referring to are from homes that were torn down and rebuilt in between 2014 and 2018. So let's make the argument based on the data that we have from your own department that people are renting their homes, then they're selling them, then people are tearing them down and rebuilding them, and then moving into them. And that is where you're getting the student generation data from the years 2014 to 2018. Well, based on that process, if a family tears down a house and rebuilds it into a 4,200 square foot home and then moves into it and then starts their family, the oldest child after they move into that family is going to be 6 and hasn't really registered in our school system yet, which is why I think student generation rates are off based on your own data and your own theory about how these homes are created. I would have more confidence in the data if it weren't just from that slice of 2014 to 2018. I think you're cherry picking the data, quite frankly.
Well, we're not. If I could, I don't think that we're cherry picking. We're working with the data that we have available to us. But the scenario that you've described is a very specific case. And when we just look at homes sold and when homes were sold over time, I mean, we're seeing that homes immediately after they're sold, they're generating students, right? So it's happening right away. Now, does that mean that you have a home that sells that they don't have any students, but they do 5 or 6 years later? Absolutely. But on average,
Right.
as
Not
soon as the
everybody
home is
moves
sold,
in as a couple, right?
right? Yeah.
Well, you're actually then making the argument about having any school impact fees at all for anybody. If you're arguing some people move into homes with kids, some don't move in with kids. I mean, that undercuts the whole argument that we're talking about here, quite frankly.
Well, no, the impact tax is based on the typical, the average, right? So the average home when it sells, I mean, we have tens of thousands of homes that are sold every single year. On average, I think they start off the very first year with, something like 0.5 students coming out of them. And by the time it's 9 years old, it's been 9 years since they've been sold, it's well over, I think, 1 student that you can, on average. And so the whole impact tax system is based on the typical, the average.
And we don't put impact taxes on existing homes. I mean, this is about new development for the impact tax. If you're really trying to gain what happens when a house has already been owned, I mean, yes, those are things that we think about in recordation tax world, or, it's.
Well, again, so the distinction here is they're new homes. They're new homes. It's undeniable by anybody. They are new homes, and whether the new home is in an infill area or is in an area, down county or something, a turnover zone, or whether it's a new home up in Clarksburg, right? That's what we're talking about.
But it's not. It's not new. It's the fact that it's sold recently. Old homes and new homes.
Replaced a home. There was a there were students possibly in the school system from the previous home. There could have been more students in the school system from the previous home. We don't actually know on a case by case basis. It's
well, and again, and Mr. President, I see you getting anxious, and I'll close rather shortly. You can't keep undercutting an argument by saying we don't know, because we have data. We know what the story of these homes are. We have the data. And to say that that is not specific data to every home undercuts the entire conversation that we're having here, because it's all about averages. Everything here is about averages. Last question I have: what is the financial impact of this piece about eradicating impact fees for homes over 3,500 square feet?
I think historically it's been about 1.6 million a year.
Okay. So in closing on this point, I said that when I was starting this SSP process, I was going to look through an equity lens. And I do not think this is equitable policy because there are large homes, brand new homes being built elsewhere in the county. And there are large new homes being built that we're trying to exempt as well. And for that reason, I will not support this measure.
Thank you. Councilmember Giwando.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Mr. Glass, for the court line of questioning. I think it's an important discussion for the millions watching at home. I get to say that today on a Friday afternoon. So I just wanted to bring up, I think in this context, could someone answer? I will be much briefer than my colleague, even though I appreciated all the questions. What's the property tax rate, residential property tax rate in Montgomery County?
98 cents per 100 assessed.
I knew that. Thank you, Ms. Freese. I was going to I believe you, and I knew that as well.
Is this more Socratic method?
It was yes, it was Socratic method. I was asking one of our council staff, but is that correct? Could you confirm that?
Sure, that's right.
Okay, thank you. And while you're confirming that, is there any property tax difference for a home that is 20,000 square feet as far as the rate versus one that's 2,000 square feet? Ms. Dunn, Mr. Orland, Ms. Santori?
No, it's based on value, so it's not based on size, it's based on value, assessed value.
Right, of the assessed value, but the rate is the same.
Oh, yes.
For the assessed value. Is
Right.
there any difference in the rate is what I'm asking?
No.
Great, yes, I knew the answer to both those questions, so I wanted to get it out there. So I think this is another thing, you'll remember earlier this year, I think it was earlier this year or late last year, it's all running together. I had worked with Delegate Julie Polakovich Carr to introduce a bill in Annapolis that would have allowed us to levy progressive property tax and change the rate based on the size. And I think, though not directly related, and why I think this is okay, I'm not going to protest this move. I understand Mr. Glass's pointing out the inconsistencies in some of what we're doing, but this is about student generation. This is about impact. I think it's a different point, but I want to make the point because if we were to do that, we could, at a time where we're crunched for cash and we're talking about how we're not going to be able to pay for things and the CIP is going to look horrible. As I've mentioned before, our constituent Daniel Snyder with 20,000 square feet should not be paying the same property tax rate as the person in the average size county home, which is what is happening. And there has been a lot written about ways to protect senior citizens and others who have larger homes that may not be as wealthy with deferrals, with income-based tax relief or deferral payments under a progressive property tax system. And I just want to point out to my colleagues, we need to revisit this. It's going to come up again in Annapolis. I didn't get much support on it. I think Councilmember Glass supported it. And Councilmember Hucker supported it. Thank you, sir. We have to revisit this. We will not be able to dig out of the hole we're in if we don't look at more progressive taxation, both in the income tax side and the property tax side, in my view. So this is an attempt at that. It's a different scenario, but I just think it's important to point out. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you, Council President. I just briefly wanted to say, I think that the cherry picking of data directed at the planning board and the planning staff in particular was completely unfair. And I don't agree. And just because you don't like what the data says, I don't think that we should be challenging the people who collect the data. The plural of anecdote is not data. And the data is clear on the points that were made, points that have been made before, points that were used to pursue public policies. And that's fine. I think we all have the right to pursue the public policies that we want, but I really don't think it's helpful to question and to undermine the great work that I think that the planning staff did to have a data-driven policy. I didn't agree with all the conclusions that they came to. I have voted against some of those proposals. I've voted for some of their proposals, but to suggest that the data was cherry-picked and not thorough and comprehensive, which it was, I think is unfair and I think is unhelpful. So I just wanted to point that out. I think that the committee made a decision based on the data. I think that the data in this policy is the most data that any prior growth policy before it. I think it's largely thanks to the incredible work of Mr. Sartori and a number of other staff members at planning, and I just wanted to thank them for that and note that point. And I hope that we can make policies. We can departure from the data if we choose. If we think there's a public policy interest on it, that's fine. We can decide what we choose to look at and what we choose not to look at. But I don't think it's fair to say that the data that has been used to look at this and other proposals is cherry picked. So I just wanted to note that.
Thank you, Councilmember Reamer, and then Councilmember Glass.
No, I withdrew my request to comment. I think we ought to keep going.
Oh, all right. Well, thank you. Then we're still going to go to Councilmember Glass.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Councilmember Friedson, I appreciate the support and share the sentiment that our planning department does yeoman's work. And I appreciated and do continue to appreciate all the work they do, so much so that I quoted their work. I quoted their exact words because I believe in what their research shows. The part that I disagreed with and the single component which I called cherry picking is looking at student generation rates for a 4-year period from 2014 to 2018. And that 4-year period, if a family decides to buy a home, tear it down, move in, and start their family, in that scenario, the oldest child is going to be 6, not really registering in our school system. And it makes it very hard for that family with their kids to come up with an accurate student generation rate. And yes, I do believe that is cherry picking the data. If we wanted a full assessment of these types of homes, let's go back 10 years. Let's go back 20 years. I yield back.
Thank you very much. And we are going to move on, but I did want to point out on the property tax and the everyone paying the same rate for their assessed value. We also receive income tax, and that should not be lost in any argument, because sometimes a person that lives in a larger home is paying substantial income tax, as we have seen over the years when we haven't received that income tax, and that's very significant to our budget. Ms. Dunn, we are going to go ahead, Councilmember Joando. I started. You get a chance. Go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate. You're a fair man, and I appreciate that. Yes, sir, we do. But I would just point out that the income tax is also not progressive. So the $20 million person pays 3.2%, and the $50,000 a year person pays 3.2%. And I don't think that's fair either. But I appreciate the point.
I appreciate that, but 3.2% of 50,000 is a whole lot less than 3.2 of 20 million. But anyhow, I mean, that's my point. Ms. Dunn, we should move on. We're going to have this good, honest, open, friendly discussion at another day. Please.
Okay. So what is before the council is the committee's unanimous decision regarding the elimination of the impact tax surcharge. And we know we have one objection at least.
I know that there is one objection. Other than the one objection, other than Councilmember Glass, is anyone else opposed to this suggestion, to this point?
I just have a point of.
Okay, please.
I just have a question. Do we need to vote? Or do we need to vote if there's an
objection? You have to vote, I think.
There he is. I'm going to vote. But I just wanted to know whether or not we were going to move on from it. Okay. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that is 8. Those opposed, please raise your hand, and that is 1. So it's 8-1. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. The next, it is somewhat related. We are going to be talking about the calculation of impact taxes on net new units. And so this was part of our earlier conversation. In recommendation 6.8 in the planning board draft, recommends, and it's really just a continuation of the current process, this idea that we really calculate somebody's impact tax requirement on net new units. If they do tear down units, they get a credit for what the impact tax would have been on those units. In talking about this, some of the council members also received some information from people within the community that have had some difficulty with this, the way this language does exist in our county code, and it requires somebody who is basically constructing a new unit on where there was a previous unit to start that construction within 1 year, or else they are levied the impact tax. There was a family, I think, contacted Councilmember Reamer, and he could speak to this, but who couldn't get that construction going within a year. I don't know whether it was maybe financing or environmental concerns, whatever, took longer. So they were facing a tax they had not anticipated, and it was significant for them. So the committee went with a modification to this, which is to say that rather than within a 4-year period, or a 1-year period, within a 4-year period, they must apply for their building permit. So again, also changing it from the trigger being construction to actually applying for that building permit, which is also easier for anyone in the county government to track whether you've applied for your permit, rather than sending an inspector to look at the property for construction. There's another piece of it. Should I keep going, or?
Well, let's make certain. I have a feeling this one's just fine. Is that without objection? That's without objection. Please keep going.
Okay. Well, the other piece of it is that, and Councilmember Friedson had also brought up a point that someone had contacted him. There can also be cases where an applicant is reticent to tear down a structure or can't start construction for some reason that is beyond their control. And so we've added language for a waiver that would be provided by the director of DPS, and we've contacted DPS and gotten their agreement on this piece. But a waiver that if the applicant cannot proceed within the time frame that is beyond their control, if they cannot go to building permit, or if they can't commence with construction before the time frame ends, they can get a waiver.
Is that without objection? That is fine, please. Without objection.
moving forward, the next thing that we started to cover in the GEO committee were impact tax credits and exemptions. And the first one was a recommendation from the planning board to allow credit for non-capacity adding improvements to a school. And the committee discussed this at length and basically came back and decided that, in fact, unanimously, that they wanted to continue to only give credit for capacity adding projects, that they wouldn't give one that simply provided a new roof or an HVAC system. And we can talk about that if you need to.
And I see a thumb up and without objection. Thank you.
Okay. The next one, there was a recommendation from Councilmember Jawando, and this is the one where Councilmember Navarro did mention there was not a decision made by the committee. They wanted more information, but he had put forth a recommendation that you as council colleagues have seen to recommend a credit for any development that is constructing 2 or 3 bedroom units, and there would be a 40% credit on the 2-bedroom unit and a 60% credit on the 3-bedroom unit. And it would only be applicable in the infill school impact areas, because these are areas where we know there's good transit. There are places where we want to see families able to access our multifamily housing, and that's been a real struggle. You noticed there was data in the planning board draft about the fact that in the last, I guess it's 5 years, only 2% of multifamily actually get built with 3 bedrooms, and only 35% with 2-bedroom units. We did ask planning staff to provide us some information on the relative rents, try to give it some sense of what would be, what's the value of having these credits? Would these be helpful? They provided the relative rents, which are on, for me, in my printed version, page 34 of part 1 of the staff report. If you turn to page 35, they also provide a mock pro forma to look at 2 example projects with all else being equal. Let's look at different unit types and look at what would be the possible rate of return for these projects given different mixes of units, one having a lot more 2 and 3 bedroom versus the one that has no 3 bedroom and fewer 2 bedroom. And it's an example. It was a way to try to get a gauge of this, but it's not a definitive viewpoint. But it basically said that if you provided some discount, you would obviously make the project who's trying to provide larger units better off. They would have a better rate of return. Would it make the rate of return high enough? They would definitely undertake the project. That would be a case-by-case basis. It's hard to determine. I'm happy to answer any questions or planning staff who did the pro forma. I see Ms. Gavoni is with us.
Thank you, but we're going to turn to Councilmember Jawando first.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Ms. Dunn, for the explanation. And thank you. I know we didn't vote on this, but it was. I would say it was warm. It was warmly received, I think, and hopefully by my colleagues. And the analysis is helpful. I think the goal of credits, which again I'm not philosophically against, and of discounts, is to do things that are harder to do for good public policy goals. And I think, as I pointed out in my memo to colleagues a couple weeks ago, and that is pointed out in the staff report, we aren't getting these units for all the reasons transit-oriented development is wanted. We want to make sure that families can afford to live in places that are accessible, and that we would give some sort of incentive to build these larger units, which we had tried to do. I think the packet also does a good job of explaining the MPDU law and how that there were some attempts to try to get that to happen. It hasn't really happened. And I think this is this pro forma at least shows us that it makes the project more profitable, and I think probably more likely. And I think that's what we want to do. We want to give credits for things that we want, that are good public policy outcomes that aren't happening, that are going to benefit our objectives. And I think this fits the bill, and I think it's worth trying, and I would hope my colleagues support it. And I appreciate the planning board's previous support. I'm assuming that hasn't changed, but they can certainly comment for themselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that in a form of a motion? What was that?
I will make a motion to for my proposal to adopt the incentives for 2 and 3 bedrooms as listed in the packet.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Council. It was made by Councilmember Jawando, seconded by Councilmember Glass. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. So I just wanted to first try to understand, make sure I understand it properly. So this would be a credit for all of those units in the building or for additional units above? Can you just clarify that?
My impression is that it would be on the units themselves. So because impact taxes are per unit. So if you're building a 3-bedroom, you get that credit for that unit. Same with the 2-bedroom. And if this does incentivize it, the one piece I didn't mention is MPDUs have to be provided in the same proportion as your market rate units. So if this incentivizes some market rate units of these size, we will get these size units also as MPDUs, which would be helpful.
So it's a credit for all of the units in a building that are 2 and 3 bedroom.
Right.
The hope is that
And infill areas, yeah.
And infill, and the hope is that by providing that credit, it makes the risk of building those units a little less, and as a result, you might get, a little more.
Right.
I mean, I have different reactions to this. Like, this is precisely what we've been saying about the cost of impact taxes in other areas. I don't necessarily object to this, but are there other examples where we say that family housing is more important than single family?
So we don't have, we don't say it in that respect, but not only do we give obviously exemptions for MPDUs and other affordable units, but we give discounts for what we call accessible units. So units that are at a level, I can't remember, I think it's in the draft, a level 1 accessibility are given credits. They are given actually, if you provide a certain amount, then your whole project gets a certain discount. So that already exists in the code. We do it for physically accessible units.
Physically, because we have
sort of a family accessible unit.
The reason being that we are concerned we're not getting enough, but that's it's not an impact tax. Anyway, okay. To me, if I don't have a family, it sounds like Montgomery County is saying housing for people with kids deserves a tax break. Housing people without kids doesn't. And that it does rub me the wrong way a little bit. I think we want housing. We don't typically distinguish that way. If I would support this, it would just be because generally I think our impact taxes are problematic, and this is a way to work against that general problem. And I am, but I also, I was earlier talking about discounting impact taxes a little bit across the board, and the concern was we wouldn't be collecting a tax that equaled 100% of the student cost. And then here we're talking about the units that potentially generate the most number of students, and we're saying let's collect less than the student cost. So it is a little bit contradictory to that.
Yeah.
Okay, Glenn, if you want to.
Yeah, this is difficult. Impact taxes are by their nature not trying to solve any other kind of public policy goal other than just measuring the impact. And to a certain degree, 2 and 3 bedroom apartments or units are being already subsidized, because if there was a way that when you reviewed a development application, you could say, oh, this is a 2 bedroom or this is a 3 bedroom unit, they would have a higher impact tax than the 1 bedroom unit, because they generate more kids. But we don't do that. We just say, according to mid-rise or high-rise, any unit within a mid-rise, regardless of whether it's 1, 2, 3, 4 bedroom, well, not 4 bedrooms, you know what I'm saying, get the same rate. Same is true with high-rise. So from that perspective, 2 or 3 bedrooms are already being subsidized.
We're not charging,
because they're not charging them
it out by
because
bedroom size.
We're not charging for their impact. I guess, if there were another way of incentivizing this kind of development, which I think everybody agrees is missing, that would be preferable. But it really doesn't fit with an impact tax, unfortunately.
The other thing, I wonder, are families really more likely to live in 2 bedrooms than 1?
What?
Well, people often live in a one-bedroom even though they have kids. I mean, it's not unheard of. So, or a child, I should say, at least. The 3 bedrooms are much less common than the 2-bedroom. You know, a 2-bedroom unit is kind of standard, more standard, I think, and could very easily be rented by a pair of young millennials, you know, as a family, or whatever, a downsizing couple that wants a home office. I mean, that's a standard use of 2-bedroom. 3-bedroom, maybe is that more likely to be a family, you know, with 2 kids that need separate bedrooms. So potentially a way to adjust it might be to say that the 3-bedroom units, which I think are genuinely rare, whereas 2-bedroom is very much, it's not that rare, I don't think. So, some thoughts as we go.
Okay. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the goal of Councilmember Jawando's motion because, you know, if all you have to do is go to any of the, you know, downtown communities and the residents themselves will say that there is a dearth of large units. They're mostly studio 1 and 1 bedrooms, and then usually the corners of those units, those buildings, might be a 2-bedroom. And that's really it. And so I myself have been trying to figure out how we incentivize larger units, more bedrooms, in areas where we know people want to move into and where families want to be. I know countless number of families in Bethesda and downtown Silver Spring who love being there and don't want a single family home, but there's not much opportunity for them. And, you know, I kind of liken this to the conversation that we just had earlier this week about wanting to incentivize units and construction on the metro. And so we engage in a conversation about property taxes there. And so here we are trying to figure out how we incentivize this type of development, which is needed. And, you know, Dr. Orland, you just said that this might not be the best vehicle for it, but it was a tough one for you. And so I'm genuinely will ask, if this isn't the right vehicle, what is the right vehicle? Because I want to support whatever is necessary to get these types of units where people want them and where the market is not currently building them.
I don't have an instant answer. This sort of occurred to me during this discussion, frankly, and I'll defer to other people who are involved with housing regularly to talk about it. All I know is that the impact of a 2 or 3 bedroom has got to be more in terms of kids being generated for public schools than a 1-bedroom or a studio, and so it doesn't lend itself to an impact tax. But beyond that, I'm not sure what else we can do. But Pam, Lisa, Jason. Help. I don't know.
I don't have an alternative for what you would do for this either. All I'll just say is that while it may not coincide perfectly with the fact that, yeah, a 2 or 3 bedroom may produce a few more students than the 1 bedroom in the studio, I think everyone naturally thinks that could happen. And I will just mention that we will re-evaluate our student impact or our student generation rates every 2 years. So if we're lucky enough to get more family-sized units in these locations, we would be capturing the fact that they'd be generating more students. So it wouldn't be they would be lost to the system. Whether it's the right mechanism or not, all I can say is the precedent set by the council is, you know, you put the highest value in the county on affordable housing. And I think after that is probably housing in general, and housing for families is important. I know we are getting a lot of housing for people that aren't families, and that's important too. It's vital. We need a vibrant community. I just don't see this as a conflict, but that's my own personal opinion.
Sure. I appreciate the candor of the uncharted territory, right, of whether this is placed in the right bucket. But for not hearing any other buckets to place it in, I'll support this motion. And if this doesn't work out, let's continue working on this.
Did anyone else from planning want to discuss this?
I just wanted to add very briefly that this was an idea that was discussed extensively in the rental housing study, and there were 3 or 4 different ideas in the rental housing study about how to encourage larger units, particularly 3-bedroom, because as Councilmember Reamer said, the 2-bedroom are not as unusual, but 3-bedroom are extremely rare. And we implemented a few of those ideas when we updated the MPDU law with the idea that MPDUs could be calculated by FAR rather than by unit number. And there were other ideas in that study. I think certainly for the 3-bedroom units, the idea of doing some sort of additional incentive may help, as long as that incentive is realized in the rents that are charged for those 3-bedroom units. Because one of the problems with 3-bedroom units is that if you're just charging market rents, we aren't talking about MPDUs, if you're just charging market rents, they're very expensive, just because you're renting on a per square foot basis in most of these buildings. And people make a choice. Should I rent that, or should I rent a whole townhouse in a different part of the county? And they choose the townhouse in a different part of the county because they are spending a lot of money. So I think the only question for me is, even if you gave an impact tax exemption, would that be realized in lower rents on the non-MPDU units? And that I just don't know.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you. I really appreciate the proposal. I really appreciate where Councilmember Jawando is coming from on this. And I think we have talked repeatedly at the council, the planning board has, planning staff has, the Fed committee has, this council has, on the need for more family units and for a diversity of housing types and housing sizes within multifamily, which is definitely a continued challenge. But I don't think this is the right approach personally. I think that the other aspects of this proposal, this would be in direct contrast to. I mean, a townhouse by its definition is a more affordable housing type than a single family home, but we charge more for impact taxes, for school impact taxes for it, specifically because it generates more students. It's based on the data. These are units that generate more students. If they don't generate more students, then it would undermine the entire purpose of the proposal that's before us and the rationale for why we would be doing it. I think that there are other creative ideas that are more robust, more comprehensive, like looking at different ways to calculate these types of costs so that it provides greater incentives to create a benefit from 3-bedroom units, which don't currently exist. We have done this successfully at times with creative public-private partnerships like the HOC EYA project at Chevy Chase Lake, which has a number of 3-bedroom income-restricted units, which is one of the real success projects, one of the real successes of that award-winning project. And I also think that things like looking at the benefit points system, the public benefit point system, and how much this actually does benefit in terms of getting increased density and other opportunities that developers have when they come before the planning board. We have put in place specific requirements for the planning board to look at those public benefit points, and it may require us to go back and look at what those are and whether they're accomplishing what our broader public policies are, and this could be a part of that. So I think there are other tools in our toolkit. I think this is definitely a shared interest that we all have, and I think that it would be accomplished better in another mechanism that doesn't have a direct impact on school impact taxes and isn't, in my view, conflicting with the way that we've addressed school impact taxes elsewhere.
Thank you. Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. And thank you, Councilmember Jawando. This is a really important issue, and so I appreciate you lifting this up. So my first question is just on the basis. We're looking at an exemption for transportation and school, or just school impact tax, based on what you're proposing, Councilmember Jawando? So that's a question for you. Is it for both, or is it just for school?
This was the school impact tax, I believe, is what we said. It was a 40. I have to go back and look at the exact numbers, but the 40% and 20%. I'm trying to remember. I believe it was school. I
think it was schools only. Just to clarify, because it's already a 0.4 factor in the infill areas for transportation. The idea is they're already getting. At least I don't want to put words in your mouth, but to be fair to the proposal, to clarify for everybody, school impact taxes you pay the full number. Transportation impact taxes are based on a factor, and the factor in the red policy areas, which roughly overlap with infill at the 0.4. So.
And I was just searching for the percentages, but yes, school impact tax.
Gotcha. Thank you. So look, this is a really hard one, right? Because part of me, let me ask another question first. So for planning staff, you had said that there was no guarantee of it happening, right? Or it encouraging the actual coming to fruition of these units because it just still isn't the same sort of market, whatever the reasons are. But is there any downside to having this as a part of what we have right now, right? So do you see some negative out of moving forward with this, even if it doesn't produce? Because obviously, if they don't produce the units, they don't get the credits, and so it doesn't really matter. So is there a harm in doing it this way? That's a question I have.
What I would say, it's just the additional loss of funding for the impact taxes to spend on schools.
But that's only if it's built, right? So only if they do it.
Right. And again, I think it would be even better if it was focused on 3-bedroom, because we are seeing 2 bedrooms built. That is not something I think we need to incentivize so much, because we see 2 bedrooms in a lot of projects. The only thing I was saying before was, even if you do a 3-bedroom and it's not an MPDU, because MPDUs would be exempt anyway, you can't guarantee that it's going to be a really attractive rent.
Right.
That was my only point that I was trying to make.
I understand. And so that is a very valid point. So even if we incentivize them to build a 3-bedroom, it doesn't guarantee that it will be an affordable 3-bedroom. It could be a 3-bedroom that's slated as a penthouse unit. And so therefore we'd be discounting something that would be one of the highest price units in the entire building. So thank you for clarifying that and giving me the one component of it that's negative. Councilmember Duando, I would just suggest to you as a part of, and again, I don't know where the votes are going to fall on this one because this is a hard one. But between the 2 and 3, because you did say incentivizing 2 and 3, it sounds like it would be better if it were 3. I'm not sure where colleagues would fall if you just focus on the 3. I am still concerned about the affordability aspect because there's no guarantee that it would be affordable. So
could I respond?
Please.
Respond to the. Yeah, so I would be open to that. I think obviously the data we pointed out was that 3 bedrooms are, I think rare might be a understatement, 2%, and they're almost non-existent. And so I'd be open to that. I think that's where the greatest need is. And on the affordability part, I think you have to remember, if a family wanted to live in downtown Silver Spring or downtown Bethesda and buy a townhome or a condo or a single family home,
so cheaper.
This is going to be like astronomically more expensive than renting in these places. And they're doing it for the transit, for the quality of life. And so I think it's not going to work for everybody, but I think it would be, there's a lot of people that would want to live with a family in a area that's transit oriented.
So let me just say this. Look, do I think that we need to work on other kinds of ways to incentivize this? And there may be something that's better for us to do. I do. Do I think that if we limited this to 3s, it's not going to damage us that much and could also benefit us in some respects? I do agree. And you do have a good point there that it's still cheaper than a townhome. It doesn't mean that it's going to go to a family who's looking for that, right? It could go to a single person who just wants a lot of space and can afford it. So, but that's the case for anything, right? So, so if you were to amend it, Councilmember Duando, then I would support it. And I'm not trying to force you either way, but I'm just saying that's where I am.
I accept your friendly amendment So it would be, just for Ms. Dunn, it would be keep the percentage for the 3-bedroom, drop the 2-bedroom, the higher the 60% for the 3-bedroom. I would amend that, and if Mr. Glass would concur.
Right. I was going to ask Mr. Glass, Councilmember Glass. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Were you finished, Councilmember Rice? Yeah. Council Vice President Hucker.
Well, now it's been amended down, but I was going to say I'm not sure why this seems so complicated. I will admit I'm not on the committee. The chair of the committee's forgotten more about housing policy than I probably ever understood. But I really don't understand why this is such a big concern. We have subsidies for senior housing. We have subsidies we spend incredible amounts of money on affordable housing, and it's never enough. And we know very clearly we need both 2 and 3-bedroom apartments for families. No one denies that. Developers, we know, can make much more money building 1-bedrooms and studios, and that will continue to be the market for a while. And that's just math. Getting 1 paycheck per bedroom is better than getting 1 paycheck per 3 bedrooms. But I think to hold this up, this proposal up, because it's not the appropriate use of an impact tax, is just letting a process concern get in the way of a policy goal. The Fed chair spent years, and we all debated it, and we all supported it, I think, passing very well-considered legislation to expand housing options by allowing ADUs. And I think we need to go farther in that direction. And the argument at the time, and we had, I don't know how many hundreds of community meetings around that very good law, was because we don't have enough diversity of housing, and family structures are changing, and those of us who are lucky enough to have housing have pressures, and we want to be able to accept our in-laws, accept our parents, have kids move home after they graduate from college because they can't afford an apartment of their own, all kinds of things. And that also creates pressure on 2 and 3-bedroom apartments. Not everyone, we've talked about individual homes, but not everybody can afford a house, or even to rent a house, or even to afford to rent a townhouse. Many families, a mile from where I am, are stuck in a 1-bedroom apartment for the whole family, or a studio, or they're sharing a 1-bedroom because it's all that was available with their cousin or their aunt or their uncle and their kids. And I wouldn't worry about what the county is saying to somebody without a family, that they're less valuable or something. I'm under no illusion they're streaming us on Friday afternoon. I worry more that they feel invisible. They're at work right now as essential workers, and they need to come back home to a county that sees them and creates housing options for them by incentivizing 2 and 3-bedroom apartments. And this is not a panacea. This is not going to create them overnight, but lowering the cost a little bit for developers to create more of those when we know that's a need, I'm not going to have any problem explaining why we did that to people. And I think explaining why it's, an inconsistent use of the impact tax in this one case is just not a big deal. I think we should achieve the policy outcome and get a better county for doing it. So that's why I'm for it.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you. So let me just explain from my perspective why we had a robust conversation in GO and we didn't come up with a particular vote. So the GO committee unanimously rejected the planning board's recommendation for the 40% school impact tax discount on desired growth areas, precisely because we are weighing this issue of how do we provide for the kind of school capacity infrastructure for the same families that Councilmember Hucker, you were just describing. How do we do that? And recognizing that this issue of impact, especially when it comes to school impact, has been such an ongoing challenge for us. So that was a huge statement that the GO committee made, and actually this council just took that straw vote. And so trying to reconcile what are the types of incentives that we're using. So it's not about the goal. Obviously, we all want more 3-bedroom, and I wholeheartedly agree. There are plenty of families that would be super stoked to be able to live in these 3-bedroom apartments, close to transit, etc. Completely agree. I guess going back to the start of this session, what I was hoping to get was a number of options that we could then look at and say, okay, since we're trying to be consistent, and again, we already, rejected a particular proposal, $62 million roughly of an impact that it would have had. Are there other options that we can strengthen to then make this a reality? And so, I thought that we could, since we said at the very beginning that there were going to be some items that we would come back to, I thought that perhaps, I still think, that maybe we should see whether our wonderful experts can come up and give us a couple of options that we can then say, you know what, let's preserve this consistency that we are trying to achieve through this SSP vis-a-vis school impact tax specifically, but let's push the envelope in this other area in order to sweeten the pot, if you will, to get these 3-bedroom units. And so that's where I was coming from. Not that I don't, absolutely I want to see how we can incentivize 3-bedroom units. It could be then affordable to our families, no doubt. So you don't have families sharing 2-bedroom apartments right now, right? Absolutely. I'm just trying to follow the bouncing ball in terms of being consistent with our intention to at least be mindful of the school impact tax as a tool. I guess it's my concern. So again, I don't know, at the beginning of the session, we talked about, do we want to rush certain things or not? I don't know if folks are open to saying, hey, we've narrowed down what we want. Could folks from the planning board, et cetera, come back, planning board staff come back with some other tools that we could perhaps then evaluate and hopefully decide. If there aren't any, right? Like, I'm super open to pushing the envelope on this, but I'm trying to be consistent because I think that's important. So that's my position. I mean, I would prefer that now that we have narrowed it down to this point, that when we come back for the next session that we said we were going to have, that we at least see whether staff can come up with, a couple of options that we can evaluate and then adopt. So that would be my recommendation or my position, but obviously it depends on, what everybody wants to do.
Thank you. Councilmember Giwando.
Thank you, and I appreciate the robust discussion. I would just say that, yes, let's do that and let's pass this. I mean, I just think that, to a point that Councilmember Rice said, look, either this is going to help marginally and they will be built and people will take advantage. I think there's still, even if it does work, even past my wildest expectations, there's still going to need to be more that we need to do to help families live in a transit-oriented development and to have more affordable housing. So I understand the point about the consistency, but I think the policy goal here trumps, no pun intended, the consistency, and I get that. I want to just give voice to that. I understand, but I think we've got to try to throw the kitchen sink at this, and I certainly be open to other proposals, but I think this is a low risk proposal that could have some value and that we should do it. So I would, I respectfully hope that we can move this forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Reamer.
Jesus Christ.
Well, go on mute.
Glenn, that was great.
Go on mute.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I realized that's.
You get the award.
You need the Cheerios.
I'll get my Cheerios now.
You're up. Go ahead.
Now I want to know why he was saying that.
Tell us what you really think, Glenn.
Like, did something happen?
I hope that wasn't in response to what I said, but we'll find
Well, it's either you or me.
We've got to move on. Let's go, please. Go ahead.
Oh, now you want us to move on.
Well, I do.
It's actually enjoyable.
You've spoken more than anybody. Don't start. Go ahead.
Well, there's a motion on the table for 3 bedrooms. It's been amended. I'm happy to support it. I would note that the incentive that the county council voted to override a veto on this year could generate as many as 170 three-bedroom units in high-rise multifamily, because that would be 2% of 8,600 units. Go team. Happy to support this. I would also note it doesn't necessarily result in any additional three-bedroom units. It's going to give a reduction for existing three-bedroom units. That may ease the burden of impact taxes generally in multifamily. I can be okay with that. If it generates additional three-bedroom units, all the better. I think there is a good argument that developers may not build them today, and people may not really choose to live in them today, because at that price point, you can live somewhere else in a single family or in a townhouse, so most people will. But 20 years from now, maybe it's a different scenario, and we would have lost whatever additional margin we could get. So I'm happy to support the amended motion.
Thank you. Councilmember Albornoz.
Thanks. Sorry, Glenn. I am, and that was really inappropriate, buddy. I just got to say, sorry. I'm deeply offended by what you just said and the manner in which you said it. So,
No, I was sorry. I was just looking at the watch, and I realized it was as late as it was. I didn't realize it was this late already. That was my reaction. It has nothing to do with what was being said.
Okay.
I apologize.
All right. Couple things. One, I think we've done a great job of building within densely populated communities. In downtown Silver Spring, we're about to add a magnificent aquatic and recreation center. We have amenities that families are going to be attracted to. And the fact that we are creating these wonderful amenities, I think, are going to attract families. And as has been stated, there just are not, a sufficient housing stock within this particular category, which I think is a problem. And so I appreciate the recommendation to see if we get additional information that may be better in terms of policy. But I think that I support the amendment along with the specifying the 3-bedroom as opposed to the 2, because I think that naturally occurring there are 2 bedrooms. So I think we've ended up in a good place in this regard. So I will support this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. I actually just, since everybody else has explained where they are, I actually believe that I'm supportive of the idea. I'm supportive of the suggestion, but I don't know that this is the best way to gain what we're trying to do. And hopefully we're going to come back on Thursday, November 5th. Councilmember Navarro and I were supposed to have a joint public safety committee, committee meeting. We're going, and that was at 1:30 in the afternoon. I've checked with staff, and we're going to change that so that we can have another council meeting at 1:30 on November 5th. We already have one at 9:30 in the morning on the 495-270 discussion. But we're going to have a meeting at 1:30 on November 5th. I believe that would be the time to actually come back with any suggestions to vote on something now. And I understand there could be the votes right now to pass this, and that's fine. But to vote on something now and then come back to come out with something that would be even better, to me, we should wait to see what we can come back with for even better. So I'm not supportive of this amendment. But with that, we have an amendment before us. Councilmember made by Councilmember Juando, seconded by Councilmember Glass. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that is Councilmember Reamer, Councilmember Rice, Councilmember Navarro, Councilmember Albornoz, Councilmember Juando, Council Vice President Hucker, and Councilmember Glass. All those opposed, and that is Councilmember Friedson and myself. So it passes 7-2. I want to be clear, I'm not opposed to the idea. I believe we should get some additional information. Very
Mr. President,
good. Yes,
President,
please.
You had missed me at the end there, but what I was just asking for is no.
Yeah.
It wasn't your fault. It wasn't your fault. It's quite all right. There's so much stuff going on. I did just want to request from staff that in this time frame, because I do believe, and you heard this in my comments, and I do think that all of us are open if staff, by the time we come up with November 5th, because these are all straw votes anyway. So if they come up with another kind of idea, I'm more than open to it, to be able to encourage 3 bedrooms that, accomplishes the same thing. I'm open to it. So we can just automatically switch to that. So it already has, so it makes it easy. And so from that perspective, it's just one in which, so staff has between now and the 5th to try and come up with some other kind of idea that I'd be supportive. I don't want to speak for Councilmember Joando. It's Councilmember Joando's amendment, but let me just say, as an individual council member, and I'd be more than happy to push forward that as another option. So that certainly is out there.
Yeah, I would just say, like I said, I think plus and. If we find something better, great. If we find something in addition to, great. I think this is something we need to throw a lot at, So, but thank you.
And on that note, we're going to move on. But on that note, if we can't find anything better, I'll come back and change my vote. Okay. Ms. Dunn, I was going to say Councilmember Dunn. I don't believe you want to go there, Ms. Dunn. Ms. Dunn, could you please continue?
Sure. Thank you. We are now, I think, turned to page 36 in my printed version of the staff report, part 1, which has to do with the exemptions for enterprise zones, opportunity zones. And then the last section, I'll just let you know where we're headed. In this section on impact taxes has to do with the impact tax exemption for providing 25% affordable units. I don't know if you want to take those in reverse order. We can probably dismiss with talking about the impact tax exemptions for projects providing a minimum of 25% affordable units, because you did have a unanimous committee recommendation on that, but I'll see what your will is.
Okay, and there again, I do have a conflict, so I will not be voting in any way on this. So I can call on people, I believe. Council Member Reamer.
Well, I was just going to suggest the 25%. We ought to just take that up next Thursday. We got a memo from Glenn, I think today. There's some information we need to process. So we've got a lot of other stuff we can get to. I'd suggest.
Is the opportunity zones? Are we talking about the opportunity zone item? I'm sorry.
Yes, we're talking about opportunity zones.
I'm sorry, and that's what we got. Didn't we get a memo from Glenn?
Yeah, but I would like to have a discussion on this. I mean, we had a vote on in GO. The council president Katz had to recuse himself, and I would like to sort of restate what I said earlier.
Your comments.
As chair of the GO committee. So I think everybody is familiar with the enterprise zone designation, but it's also clear that there are parts of the county, obviously, that have redeveloped much faster than other parts of the county. So whenever the enterprise zones would then expire, for some areas, obviously, there was a need to continue to see if we could continue, that we could extend that or in some way be able to continue to provide some of these exemptions and these incentives. And so for a while, a number of us have been trying to figure out what could we do to recognize that there are some instances where you may have, downtown Silver Spring redeveloping greatly, while Wheaton, it may take a little longer, or some other kinds of treatments in order for it to get to that point. And so Gene Smith, for example, had begun to work on a particular bill that I had requested to see if we could put forward some metrics that recognize that. And we made a decision not to introduce that bill because the SSP was going to come up and we were going to see what perhaps was incorporated into the SSP. The opportunity zone proposal contained in the SSP provides for that kind of opportunity, no pun intended, to recognize that perhaps there are certain instances where, yes, we should continue to provide this kind of incentive because, after all, this is what we're trying to do, is to realize that. I can speak specifically to, as I mentioned earlier, Wheaton, Glenmont, and White Oak. These are 3 particular areas where the clamoring of the residents and my constituents, both before I started, before the redistricting and after, was the notion that, where are the amenities? Where are the jobs? Where's the infrastructure? How come our young people have to, get on a bus or maybe have to be driven, to downtown Silver Spring. How come there are no like destination areas nearby? And all of that has to do with the fact that there wasn't a lot of redevelopment that had been slated for those areas. So we worked really hard, both, in passing the White Oak Science Gateway, Viva White Oak Master Plan to set the stage there. About Wheaton revitalization. Of course, we all keep hoping that one day, Glenmont, something would happen. And the truth of the matter is that, yes, even though some of the data states that, enterprise zone hasn't really helped that much, there are other factors that go into this, right? There could be the recession. There could be, the fact that, yes, other parts of the county began to revitalize much quicker. And so these areas are trying to catch up. That's why it's been uneven. And so I think that at the very minimum, the council should consider making sure that, White Oak, Wheaton, and Glenmont do move forward within this opportunity zone designation that the planning board has recommended. At the very minimum, I mean, we supported in our GO committee deliberations this proposal as a whole with the, recusal of Council President Katz. But if for some reason the council is, not interested in supporting it as a whole, I would want to make sure that at least those areas continue to be designated. For White Oak, this is pivotal. It is absolutely pivotal. The Greater Colesville Civic Association, many other civic associations understand very clearly that they want everything to continue to be in place in order for us to realize something. Wheaton, no doubt, there's momentum. We can't stop that. So I want to make sure that I think that in general, and I understand, what was shared regarding NPDUs, et cetera, as I said earlier, for this part of the county, we are fortunate to have a lot of market affordable housing already in place. We're looking for amenities. We're looking for destination spots, the pieces that have been very difficult to bring. It's interesting, even things like a grocery store. I think I shared with everybody how it was so illustrative to go through the process of trying to get a grocery store at Plaza del Mercado in Lake Hill. And for the longest time, what they were telling me was, I'm sorry, the demographics in terms of the market segment doesn't support X, Y, or Z supermarket, right? And so finally, when the owners came and said, we want an LA Fitness, we need a ZTA, I said, well, bring me a grocery store and then we can talk about this. But it was insane how even getting a grocery store was such a difficult, heavy lift in an area that is very vibrant. And this to me was very telling for this very strange sort of limbo that this part of the county continues to be perceived as. And so we have got to make sure that we retain these types of designations because, again, we talk about the tool in the toolbox. This is a major tool in the toolbox for that kind of, pursuit of amenities and the kind of vibrant centers that other parts of the county enjoy. I have to explain this to my young adult daughters all the time. They're like, Mom, I was up county and wow, it's really cool over there. I went to Pike and Rose. What are you doing? Like, oh, I'm working on it. So I just want to say that, if we're not going to do this as what the planning board recommended, and I don't know if maybe some other colleagues of mine have other areas that they would like to include, that we should at least consider designating some areas. In my opinion, of course, I would like to propose White Oak, Wheaton, and Glenmont, because again, I think this is another tool that we should keep. So that is what I would like to share. Again, the GO committee recommended that we just do it as it was proposed. So I turn it back to you, Mr. Council President, but to hear from my colleagues. But I do have that proposal in mind that I would like to obviously move depending on where the direction of the conversation goes.
Okay, Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate Council Member GO Chair Nancy's comments and really do want to recognize her advocacy over many years for the enterprise zone in Wheaton, for example, and Glenmont, which I think time is proving, she's been correct about that. And I share her comments about White Oak as another key marker. I just wanted to add to that, the Fed committee, we convened a meeting with the Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation about a year ago, maybe a little less. And we looked at opportunity zones generally. And we had a terrific discussion, looking at all the ways that a community can kind of build on that designation and support revitalization. And I drafted legislation to create an exemption for opportunity zones. And then with COVID, everything got swept up, and the planning board kind of rolled it into their plan. And so I'm glad. I think there's a better way to bring it forward anyway. And I think it's a really good proposal. I think it recognizes that there are parts of the county where it just, the burden, I've been saying this several times now, that the hump is too high to get over. Like you can't get projects started. And, we need this kind of progress, countywide. So I think it's a great proposal. I'm comfortable with it as the committee recommended it. If others want to consider alternatives, there could be alternatives. But I think the committee recommendation is good. So I support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you. So I want to talk about this. I've talked about this a lot and thought about these a lot, and it's a big opportunity zones. Like many things are, the word sounds great. We all love opportunity. Part of my platform, we all talk about it. But in practice, when you look at the track record, and this was a big thing pushed by the current administration, it tends to, on the whole, again, there's some exceptions, just benefit investors and not necessarily benefit the communities that they're purported to go to. And so wealthy people getting wealthier. And so I would want to know a couple things. If we're going to do it, and I'm not, again, opposed to it, I agree with, I think what I would say is the thrust of Council Member Navarro's comments, that they should be targeted on areas where we haven't seen what we want, and where we haven't seen the particularly commercial development that we want, like East County, like parts of Up County, and other places. That's where it should be targeted and focused, and it should be focused on commercial, which I think is a part of the recommendation that council staff makes, which I want to ask about. But so I would not be in favor of a blanket exemption. I think I read an article in City Lab. I know a lot of you like City Labs. It was or Bloomberg or something. It said, this was over the summer or something, but it was like about opportunity zones, and just basically pointing out this point that they have to be very targeted, and otherwise they just kind of they don't really have the effect you want. So I guess my question to council staff is, could you explain your recommendation? Is it consistent with what I said, which would be targeted and focused on commercial areas where we're not currently seeing? And then the third criteria for me is where we're not already seeing development, because I brought this up in the case last week, where we should be, if once you see something be successful, you should phase it out because it's successful, it's done its job. So could you just explain your recommendation? And if it's not consistent with that, I'll say something else, but I want to make sure I understand it.
It's about 80% consistent, but
okay,
it's
just stop.
but,
you just stop there, then, Glenn.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. I won't look at my watch either. Should I continue?
Yes, please.
Okay.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. The gist what we're trying to say is that the best way of dealing with this would be to have fewer blanket exemptions, but to increase the amount of money that's available in the HIF and in the EDF, to be able to look at each project separately, because every project has a different story. One project in the same area could provide a lot more public benefit for the investment of the public dollar than another. And you have to think of these exemptions or discounts as being money out of the county's pocket, as if we're spending money, because it is the same thing. I totally agree with the idea that if you're going to do this kind of thing, the first priority really is for commercial development, because that's where we're lagging, where job growth is almost non-existent. And parts of the county that Ms. Navarro referred to is all part of that. And the specific proposal in the packet was to not do the opportunity zones at all, but to phase out the enterprise zones as they age out, but only for the housing side of it. Keep the exemption for the commercial side. I think would be fine also to identify more areas that are opportunity zones, or just more areas, we're not to call them opportunity zones, that the council members think are important to incentivize, and to say that applies to those areas too. The planning board did that. The activity centers, that the desired growth areas that they recommend in their plan, isn't all of the activity centers and hotspots that are in COG's plan. They basically said, well, Bethesda doesn't need the help, so let's not include Bethesda. I think Albany was another one. So they could pick and choose. You can pick and choose, as long as you're doing it publicly and you're thoughtful about it. Frankly, I don't see anything wrong with that. And you're being more surgical. You're being more targeted. And then you have the other issue that Mr. Katz will bring up about Rockville. The city of Rockville doesn't want to have the opportunity zone discount in the Rockville Pike one, which is within the city. So I guess that would be my recommendation, is not make a decision today, but over the course of the next week, go look at all these areas again and identify which are the areas that you feel most strongly about, as Ms. Navarro did, and also think in terms of whether it really needs to be both housing and jobs, or just jobs.
Yeah.
And depending on how far you go in that direction, will reduce effectively the foregone income that the county will be getting.
I appreciate that. And you went to my next point, which was going to be, I'd spoken, as I'm sure Mr. Katz and others have, because they've done a good job of outreach to our Rockville City Council members and mayor, who I don't think we should in any way interfere with their project and cause them that loss of revenue. So I won't make a motion, but I would give my sense that I would agree with that maybe we go back and put a list together with everybody and then come back. I would just think it needs to be targeted, focused on areas. I agree with the three that Ms. Navarro suggested and a few others, and then just be for commercial, in my view, I think. So I just want to make that statement. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Anderson.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a couple points here, which maybe people could think about over the weekend. The first is, I strongly disagree with the view expressed by Dr. Orland that residential is not the point of these exemptions, that's not necessarily helpful to economic development. I've written several blog posts actually making the case that housing is a fundamental part of our economic competitiveness, because the high cost of housing is almost entirely responsible for the difference in the cost of living between Montgomery County and the other jurisdictions competing with us for jobs. And so the ability to attract and retain the workforce that we need is being seriously compromised, in my view, and I think the data bears this out, by the extraordinarily high cost of housing in Montgomery County and in the DC region. So I think it is incorrect to say that housing is not an economic development priority, particularly in these areas. Second thing I would say, and this is to sort of the general critique that Mary Beck and others have sort of raised about, oh my God, we're losing, you can't afford to lose this revenue. There's almost no development going on in these places, very few units. It's true that Silver Spring successfully incentivized quite a bit of residential development over the last 10 or 20 years with the impact tax exemption. I would argue that has been central to Silver Spring's success. It's a good thing. That's what this type of policy looks like when it's working. I think everybody, at least the county council certainly has indicated, agrees, and the planning board agrees, that we would like to see growth kick-started in the East County, particularly White Oak, also Glenmont, also Wheaton. There are other areas. And I think that housing is really the way to get that, to catalyze that. It's not going to be realistic just to say, well, we'll take some commercial development here, but don't worry about the fact that no housing is getting built. The last point I'll make is, while you're certainly free to reach your own conclusions about which areas warrant the incentives, the planning board was very careful when we asked the staff. We said, look, all of us have our own ideas, and all the elected officials will have their ideas about which areas are deserving, which areas require the incentives to, and which ones are desirable. We want a principled basis to draw that line. And I think the staff's recommendations, which the planning board adopted, accomplish that by making sure it's focused on opportunity zones combined with activity centers. So we're getting the places which are important to get more development from the point of view of smart growth and creating real centers of activity and vibrant communities and neighborhoods, combined with the idea that they should be places that have been neglected in the past, that have suffered from disinvestment. So if you want to draw a new list, absolutely, by all means, I won't, try to talk you out of it, but I would just urge you, rather than just to compile a list of all the ones that sort of come to mind, come up with some objective criteria, because otherwise I think you're going to find yourself running into the same problem that the planning board did of saying, well, what about Glenmont? What about Wheaton? What about here? What about there? And I think the decision will come more quickly and also be more grounded in some reasoned basis for providing the incentives if you can all agree on a principle rather than simply creating a list of geographic areas that everybody puts on a list in a brainstorming session. That's just my suggestion.
Thank you,
Mr. President.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I just point out just one thing on the
Sure,
opportunity
go
zones?
ahead.
I appreciate that, but the opportunity zones were created by a suggested list of chief executives and a political list, so with other factors. So I get that point, and I think I understand the basis for what planning did and appreciate all the work. But I do think, at some point you're going in circles there. Go ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Beck.
Yes, I did just want to point out one thing, and it's in the addendum, but with the opportunity zones, obviously we've still got the students coming. Viva White Oak, those numbers are not included in the cost information you have for opportunity zones. But when we do the calculations, Viva White Oak would be at least $59 million, not including any commercial development, because we don't have enough data to estimate that, and would be generating almost 1,100 kids. So again, obviously you have a lot of trade-offs you're weighing, but I just wanted you to have that information.
Thank you. Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much. And I want to pick up where Casey Anderson left off, because I've experienced that. I experienced it in Clarksburg. And Councilmember Navarro and I often lament over drinks or virtual drinks about this, about the battle scars we have in trying to deliver grocery stores for our communities. And what do they say? They say, you don't have enough rooftops to justify a grocery store. It's the reason why we had to create the fastest, master plan amendment that's ever been done in the council's history to try and get a grocery store for Clarksburg. And they still don't have enough. They only have the one. Harris Teeter serving all of those rooftops is insane, right? So it still needs to happen. So there's so many that are there. What I would suggest, counter to saying what needs to be on the list, just pull the things off that we agree don't need to be on the list. Because the ones that are on there for a reason. I agree. I mean, it's like, look, I don't need to go and give you a list of justification. That's the reason why they're on the list now. It is because they all have challenges. I mean, look at Gaithersburg, where we have a dead mall, that's on the line of Gaithersburg and Montgomery Village, and we're going to have to do something there. And it's going to be a catalytic change for that community. It's going to have residential and commercial. So I agree with Chair Anderson wholeheartedly. I mean, but I do think that, in general, we should have a criteria. I think for the most part, we've done some of it political, but at the same time, honestly, these are things that we know our community needs and is looking at. We know what's happening in our communities, and look, our district, council members do this, and our at-large members know this very well too. But I will just tell you, as a district council member, those areas that are on that list are on for a reason, and it's not hard for me to justify why it is that they're there. I mean, when you look at even a small area like Damascus, and you look at the small amount of incentivization that's gone into their downtown town area, I mean, we had to make some changes, state changes when it came to allowing alcohol sales and things like that. Now we're starting to see a few restaurants start to creep in there, right? But it still needs that change. And so what do? We fought. You know, there were some members of the community who didn't want some additional development to come in through HOC. We got that in, and now we're seeing more rooftops there, and it's justifying more development that's happening in terms of commercial, which means more jobs and more positivity going all around. This is what we want to do, right? That's what this tool is to be used for. And so it does have to be both. I agree. It does have to be both. It can't just be commercial. It's got to be the residential to help substantiate it, because these people who are coming in are making these very tough decisions when it comes to how to invest in our communities. And they're doing it based on the people that we have there too. So it is twofold. So again, from my perspective, it's about making sure that we keep the list. We identify the things we want to take off, would be my suggestion. And then when it comes to whether it's commercial or residential, it's got to be both. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilmember Albornoz.
Thank you, Mr. President. I guess I'll start where Councilmember Navarro started, and the stories that she told of her constituents completely tracks with what I heard during the campaign trail 2 years ago when I was in over 101 living rooms across this entire county. And people want those amenities. They want to be able to have a halfway decent cup of coffee close to their place, a grocery store, a restaurant, a nightlife, somewhere families can go to collaborate and recreate. And I'll also make one point that hasn't been made yet. The pandemic has completely shifted the paradigm in this new virtual world in which many more people are working from home. They're not traveling long distances to go to the District of Columbia or other areas. And our local restaurants here in the Kensington area have been thriving because their lunch populations have increased dramatically since the beginning of the pandemic. And so people are staying closer within this 2-mile radius of their home than they ever have before, which is really, I think, going to further incentivize, in addition to the incentive we're talking about right now, more development and allow development to take more chances in our community. And clearly, I think that we need to target in areas that, for whatever reason, we have not been able to get off the ground in the way that we would like. So I completely agree with the committee recommendation here. I'm ready to move that. And then as we have done with other votes, this is a straw vote. As more information comes forward, Mr. Anderson raised some very good points and may provide some additional information that will be helpful before a final vote. But I'm comfortable with this because I feel like it's an investment and we need this spark.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to support the motion and what the committee recommendation and move forward. If, like with everything else, these are straw votes. If we want to hone that and tweak that, I think that is reasonable and appropriate as part of the broader context. I think we can be doing this with everything. Once we come back to the table and have a full picture of how all of the pieces fit together, we'll be able to see it. And I would just point out that the proposal that I put forward that I mentioned earlier, I think dovetails almost perfectly with this particular proposal as well, specifically because there's a significant overlap in a number of desired growth areas and the opportunity zones and enterprise zones as well. So happy to support the committee recommendation, happy to continue the conversation as we get to final discussions and look at what the revenue impacts and the other discussions are. And we can certainly fine tune this like we may be fine tuning other aspects of this proposal as we move forward before we make final determinations and final votes on the 16th.
Thank you, Ms. Dunn. We do have a committee recommendation. Do you want to restate it, please? Everybody can now remember what it was.
Actually, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Orland because he covered this section because we are now Enterprise Zone and Opportunity Zone recommendation by the GO Committee.
Sure. The motion was to, the proposal was from the committee is to adopt the planning board's recommendation, which is to delete the former enterprise zones, but to include all the opportunity zones that the planning board had recommended, and to provide a exemption for both school and transportation impact taxes on all of those.
Okay. Councilmember Giovanni, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but do you object to that, or is this going to be without objection?
Well, I don't think that was what I asked for. Unless we're saying, were you restating the committee recommendation, Glenn, or were you restating?
Yes.
Yeah, there was a motion. There was a motion to support the committee's recommendation, and I mean, we didn't even need a motion because it was the committee recommendation, but it was moved and seconded. I think we should take a vote. And there was also the comment made that we can definitely come back because these are straw votes, and then if we want to refine it more. But I think the motion in the second was to support the committee's recommendation.
Which would be the blanket. Could you just restate it? I'm sorry.
Yeah, it is. It's planning board to end the exemption for former enterprise zones and to initiate an exemption for development in qualified opportunity zones. So this is what the planning board
anything that's an
recommended.
opportunity zone would have residential and commercial exemption, right? Is okay.
Correct.
Yeah. So yeah, I do. I would call for a vote.
So we have to vote. Yeah.
We're going to vote. Okay. All those in favor of the motion, committee recommendation, motion of the committee recommendation, please raise your hand. And that is Councilmember Reamer, Councilmember Rice, Councilmember Navarro, Councilmember Albornoz, Councilmember Friedson, Councilmember Hucker, Councilmember Glass. So that is 6 people, seven people. And all those opposed, please raise your hand. Is Councilmember Jawando. So the vote is 7-1 since I've abstained.
Mr. Katz, I know you can't vote on it, but this one you probably could. We talked earlier, might want to make a motion about exempting the city of Rockville.
Would that be appropriate? Well, I can't make
I think
that'd be
you
appropriate
can
at this point.
because it's their property. I think was in Gaithersburg.
No, I know.
Yeah, I can make I'll make the motion. If I make the motion to exempt Rockville from what we just decided. And
Councilmember Rice, are you seconding that? It's been seconded. And might I just add, I'm very supportive of that. Is that without objection? Very good. Thank you. That is without objection.
Just a point of clarification.
Okay.
Is there any part of the opportunity zone that goes beyond the city's limits?
This would only be for the city's limits.
No, I understand that. I'm just wondering, is there any part of the opportunity zones where you'd have an opportunity zone and the city part of it would not be eligible for this, and the sliver that's outside of the city would be? I just want to clarify that for
the best way to check. Yeah, if you go to Circle 98, there's a map of the of that opportunity zone. I'm trying to find it as we speak.
Dr. Orland, I've pulled it up on our interactive map.
Oh, good, thank you.
The opportunity zone that is in Rockville is only within the city limits. It does not extend beyond.
Okay, I thought so. I just wanted to clarify that
and I'm glad you clarified that because that's important.
Okay, I'm comfortable. I was supportive of the motion. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Thank you. So that is without objection. Unless I see somebody jumping up and down, that's going to be without objection. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for pointing that out, Dr. Orland, and thank you to everyone for voting for that. That was, in my opinion, the right thing to do. So who's leading us now? Are you leading us, Dr. Orland?
Oh, are we? Go ahead, Pam. I'm sorry.
Sorry, we have one more thing.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
The impact tax recommendations that were reviewed by the GO committee, and this was the recommendation from the planning board to make a modification to the current exemption for projects that are providing a minimum of 25% of their units as affordable units. There are 2 pieces to this recommendation. The first piece was that the affordable units be required to be placed in the moderately priced dwelling unit program. That was a unanimous support by the GO committee for that. I'll stop. Make sure.
See, Councilmember Navarro, did you have a comment on that one, or could you repeat that one, Councilmember?
That was a committee recommendation.
That was a committee recommendation.
Committee recommendation to support that the affordable units associated with the 25% or more projects be placed in MPDUs.
Right.
That's a planning board recommendation, so we just supported the planning board's recommendation on that.
Okay. Councilmember Reamer.
I'm sure this is fine. I just wanted to ask, when we were looking at this a year ago, there was some concern about tax credit units, and was that all addressed by the planning board? And there's different types of affordable units, and can you just comment on whether this means that affordable units that are built with tax credit funding would no longer be eligible?
I'll see if Ms. Gavoni, can you answer that from the planning board?
Sure, Lisa Gavoni for the record. The draft document proposes changes that all of the MPDUs would have to be placed, all of the affordable units would have to be placed in the MPDU program, which was the same subject of the bill that was introduced. So yes, that modification has been made within the draft policy.
Okay.
Okay.
Is that
not a concern from the? Okay. As I understood it before, there are affordable developments that leverage state tax credit funding that do not go into the MPDU program. Am I wrong about that?
You are correct. The low income housing tax credit, which is the primarily affordable housing program we are talking about, they do not go into the MPDU program. They are controlled generally by the state compliance. They have a shorter control period than the MPDU program. The MPDU period for rental units is 99 years. Tax credits tend to be a 15-year initial compliance period up to 30 to 40 years. So we want the units to have the longer control period if they're getting this impact tax break.
Okay.
Okay. Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, just to clarify, I mean, I'm fine with that. I went with this proposal. I just want to note, I think what Councilmember Reamer was noting is the committee discussion that we had previously, and the issue that if you have a building that is significantly older than 30 years, the likelihood is that that's already market rate affordable housing. For years 31 to 99, the likelihood that you would need the income restriction is probably unlikely. And so the question is whether or not there's significant additional benefit from 99 years versus 30 years, because that's really the main issue, are the first 30 years, where the units that are newer and tend to be more expensive. Hopefully we get to a housing market where it's healthier and it's a more natural life cycle where we have more market rate affordable housing. Unfortunately, we're not building enough housing in order to allow that to happen. This council is doing a lot of work on that. But I just wanted to note that is the issue that was discussed for those who were not participating in the prior Fed committee policy discussions that we discussed this. The planning board decided to go ahead and just include that, and the committee went forward and accepted it. But it's the question of whether a tax credit deal, is a significant loss of affordable housing based on the life of the unit. Also, once a building gets knocked down, the MPDU no longer exists either. So it's 99 years for the life of a building, and many buildings don't last 99 years. So, thanks.
Okay, so is that without objection? That was the committee recommendation. You're fine? Okay, that is without objection. Pam, was there anything else from you?
Yes, there's one more piece today, and that is the second part of that recommendation, which is currently the projects that provide 25% or more of the units as affordable, they're exempt from the payment on all their impact taxes. And what the planning board has recommended is moving to giving them a discount, and the discount would be equal to the lowest impact tax rate for the unit type. And the reason for the change is that we had quite a few projects that had taken advantage of this, and the foregone revenue to the county is actually quite high. And so in balancing, one, the desire to continue to keep a program that does incentivize 25% or more MPDUs, but at the same time recognizing that we do still need the revenue for transportation and for schools. So the committee discussed the planning board's recommendation, and again, 3-0 voted in support of that recommendation.
Okay, is there objection to that? Without objection. Okay, Pam?
The only thing that I will note, because this came to my attention from planning staff, and they can speak to it as well, is that when they were developing this through the planning board, the recommendation to have the discount equal to the lowest impact tax rate, they were combining the low-rise and high-rise rates. When we have now separated them, the anomaly is under multifamily high-rise. The lowest rate is in the turnover area. But what we know we would like the best discount for on these units, because we want them in infill, we want them where people have access to transit. The council may want to consider modifying that language slightly, which would be not to give the discount to the lowest impact tax rate, but to give the discount equal to the rate in the infill area. And I can answer any questions, but I needed to bring that up. It was brought to my attention by Mr. Sartori.
Okay, Mr. Sartori? Trouble, is he? Yes, go ahead.
Well, yeah, and so it was really, as Ms. Dunn said, once we split out low-rise and high-rise, we found this anomaly that the lowest student generation rates for high-rise are actually in our turnover impact areas, and so we have the lowest impact taxes there. And so just by changing the wording to say, instead of that the discount would be equivalent to the lowest impact tax rate for that housing type or dwelling type, it would be based on the infill impact area rate and on the transportation side, the red policy area rate.
Okay. Is there objection to that? Councilmember Friedson.
No, I was just going to move it, but without objection if there is none.
Okay. Is there objection, or it is without objection? We're going to do that.
Great.
Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's awesome. That concludes my stuff for the day.
Well, all right, so we're now going to go to Dr. Orland. Dr. Orland, we're going to do a time check here. It's now 4:25. How long do you think your part will take? We are going to have something on November 5th. We're going to have a session start at 1:30 for this discussion. We're going to have another discussion at 9:30 in the morning, but on this discussion. So how long do you think your part would take today?
Really depends on how much discussion there is. There was some disagreement on some issues. What I suggest is we maybe start and go as long as the council wants to go. I mean, do you want to go to 4:45, 5 o'clock?
Well, it's now 4:30, so I don't know. How much can we get done in 15 minutes is the question, if that's what you're saying. Or do you want to go to 5 o'clock?
Whatever you want. Whatever you want.
Okay. Does the council want to go to 5 o'clock? Does the council... 5 o'clock, I'm seeing thumbs up, 5 o'clock. Okay.
Definitely not later than that.
Not later than 5 o'clock. All right. So, Dr. Orland, you can look at your watch every now and then. Okay, go ahead. It's going to be 5 o'clock. Okay.
And all the expletives will be deleted. The first set of issues has to do with policy area boundaries. This went to both committees because it has an effect on
Let me interrupt you for 1 second. Where are you in the packet?
Oh, I'm sorry. Part 2. Which is on your 250-page document. It's page 174. If you're looking at it that way, if you're looking at your
Is this
screen.
the same document that we've been scrolling through, Glenn?
Yes, yeah, it is. You have to go past all the attachments from part 1 before you start with part 2, which is, again, in total this is a 250-page document with the cover memos and the attachments. But my memo part 2 starts on the 174th page of this 250-page document. So you'll spend a minute to getting there. I could start talking at least, but maybe while you're getting there.
Okay.
Okay. Again, the first few issues were joint committee because it affects the policy area boundary, which in effect affects two things: the congestion standard in the SSP, but also the impact tax rates. So the first issue has to do with the Forest Glen Metro Station. When you adopted the Forest Glen Montgomery Hills plan early in this year, one of the directions was to have the planning board come back with a proposed boundary of a Forest Glen Metro Station policy area, with the idea that it would become what's called a red area. Currently, the area north and south of the Beltway in that area is part of the orange areas of Kensington, Wheaton policy area, and Silver Spring Tacoma Park policy area. And so one of the things that we typically do for Metro Station policy areas is we look at about a half-mile walkshed. That's the standard that WMATA uses in its development of station area planning, as well as what our model has been over the years for Metro Station policy areas. It doesn't follow exactly half a mile, but it's roughly half a mile. And so we looked at that, and that's on circle 1 of the first attachment. And what you see is that the boundary would go up to about August Drive, a little further north, and south to Seminary Road, but also go wider. We go east and west to go over as far east as Holy Cross Hospital and west, not quite as far as Seminary Road. In any event, the Planning Board, however, is recommending using the same boundary as the what was in the master plan for Forest Glen and Montgomery Hills, which is basically along Georgia Avenue. And this is, you'll see this on Circle 2, goes along Georgia Avenue, goes as far north as Dennis Avenue, includes Medical Center Park area, and it goes far south of, really just south of 16th Street, which is actually Grace Church Road, which extends well beyond a half mile to the north and to the south, but doesn't extend more than a few hundred feet east and west. And so the committee, joint committees voted on this, and it was a 3-2 vote. Mr. Reamer, Mr. Friedson, and Ms. Navarro agreed with the planning board's boundary, and Mr. Jawando and Mr. Katz agreed with the idea of doing a boundary which is roughly equal to a half a mile. And so that's the first issue.
Could I ask?
Please, Councilmember Reamer.
Can you just state it simply? Also, describe the differences between the two boundaries for everybody.
If you best thing to do is really go to the map. Circle 1, which is, I'm trying to find here we go. If you look at, it's page 200 of the 250-page document. It's the best way I can point it out to you. It runs as far south as Seminary Road, and runs as far north as Hilda Rose Drive, a little further north than Hilda Rose Drive. But it goes as far east as Holy Cross Hospital and almost as far west as Seminary Road over there. And so it doesn't capture all of the Forest Glen area, but it captures the core of the Montgomery Hills area and Forest Glen. However, again, the board is recommending not as far east and west, but much further north up to actually on Circle 2, which is the page 201, which goes up to Dennis Avenue to the north and goes down to Grace Church Road, which is just south of 16th Street, to the south.
Okay. So the map the board recommends really corresponds a bit more to the commercial properties, the existing development of the area, in my opinion, which is what we addressed in the master plan. And what you've done is you've got more of a watershed map, which produces a different outcome. Majority recommendation is for the planning board map.
Correct.
So we have a recommendation before the council. I guess I'll say I supported the planning board's recommendation because I think it's just a little bit more intentional about what's on the ground. We went through that process in the Forest Glen master plan. We thought about it. We decided to apply the zone to those properties, because of the same kind of reasons we're talking about impact taxes. And so it just had a nexus there based in what we were trying to achieve in that community-driven master plan, and didn't feel the need to be so rigid about one specific, half-mile watershed, and could just use the map that we had just passed in the master plan.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you. No, I wanted to concur with what Councilmember Reamer just stated. I think that is an area that, of course, I also know very well because I used to live there for 10 years, but it's definitely an area that would benefit from this expanded radius, if you will. We do see a lot of very well-established neighborhoods, but also the kind of housing, kind of like the step-up housing as well. And I think that already a lot of people, walk to Forest Glen Metro Station from that particular area. Even when I used to live there, folks would do that. And so it's an opportunity to even provide more of a sort of incentive to get that corridor to be a bit more of, it was described that right now it's not such a great place to be walking to the metro station, but I think that doing this then provides that incentive and begins to establish that. as such, and we want to promote more of an opportunity for people to walk to Metro. And so, again, given the makeup of those type of neighborhoods where you have a lot of, you have a lot of families, you have a lot of step-up housing type places, I think this would make it even more attractive, and it would promote more of a desire to be able to walk to Metro and utilize that as well. So that's why I thought that this made sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, the Fed chair answered my questions, just about the how this fits with, the broader vision for Forest Glen that we as a council approved earlier this year or last year. And Councilmember Navarro just eloquently stated why we should move forward with this. So I'll yield back.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
Yes, thank you. I definitely support the committee recommendation. And, we talk about a half-mile walk shed. That's supposed to be a guideline. It's not supposed to be rigid. We generally don't treat that as rigid. And actually, if you even look at the map of what we're talking about here, the walk shed and the red policy area is only covering a narrow strip, because much of the half-mile radius is in neighborhoods where intensive development is not zoned and is not likely. So context matters when it comes to walkability, when it comes to placemaking, when it comes to building the type of transit-oriented, livable, walkable, accessible communities, the very ones we are promoting and attempting to create when it comes to the policy areas that we have. And so I think that it makes sense to include the areas that we think contextually are contiguous and appropriate to be part of this transit-oriented, walkable area. And depending on where you are, walkability changes. If you're in a suburban setting where there are strip centers, you will not walk a quarter mile most likely, because it is not safe and inviting to do so. If you're in an urban setting on a street grid, you'll likely walk a mile and a half, 20, 25 blocks, no problem. It's more efficient than getting into a car or even to bike at times because of the walkability. So it's not just distance, it's also context. And I think as we talk about this as well, I just wanted to point out, we've gotten really deep into the weeds, and that's really important. It's what we have to do. But if we take a step back, what we've talked about in this policy is adequate and appropriate infrastructure. And the question of the red policy area that I think has been lost in much of the conversation and the advocacy on this is, it's not just about what impact taxes we charge in what area and what the revenue impact is on the county. It's what type of infrastructure do we want, do we expect, are we encouraging, are we even testing for, in order to make sure that the transportation network is appropriate to the context of the land use that we want. And in that context, it's even more important, I think, that the boundaries be established how the planning board had envisioned them, which I think is very much in keeping with the master plan work that we did at this council and in the Fed committee in order to create the re-envisioning of this critical area that Councilmember Glass just noted, and that all of us have been so invested in and have worked with community members for a long time on, many of whom have worked a lot longer, frankly, than I have. So I hope we'll move forward with the committee recommendation.
Thank you. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Orland, Dr. Orland, I just want to make sure I remember this properly. And could you restate what the breakdown in committee and the reasoning, particularly we've heard a lot on the committee recommendation, the reasoning for your recommendation that I supported in committee?
The reason for the recommendation is that again, the typical walk shed of a metro station area is about a half a mile. It can be somewhat more than that. It's also an average of people walking to Metro from their home to also from people walking from Metro to their jobs, which is typically a lot shorter than a half a mile. So it's sort of an average of those two. And everyone's right. I mean, it's never exactly half a mile. Right. I'll show you a little later the Rockville Town Center one, which is even that isn't exactly half a mile. But The idea is that you're trying to relate congestion standards and impact tax to the kind of infrastructure that's needed around a metro station. And when you get beyond a half a mile, 3/4 of a mile, for example, you're not. There's really no distinction between that and some other area which is 3/4 of a mile away.
Right.
And if you look at Circle 1, the walk shed, one of the reasons why I had recommended going east and west as well, it doesn't have any effect on the congestion standard because there's no traffic signals in that area. But there may be, and I think Mr. Friedson said it, there really, those areas are largely built out, but there are a few vacant parcels. And if somebody wanted to build a house that's well within a half a mile on a vacant lot, why shouldn't they pay an impact tax that's 60% less? And unless you draw the boundary to include those areas, that won't happen. So that was the rationale for going east as well.
Why should they pay an impact tax that's 60% less, you said?
Why shouldn't? Why shouldn't they pay a much lower impact tax? Exactly.
Right.
So that was the point of that.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. So, and the vote was what in the committee?
3-2. You, Mr. Katz, and Mr. Jawando voted not in favor of the planning board's recommendation.
Okay. Mr. Jawando, have you changed your mind on this?
I mean, I think we all want the same thing out of this policy. Where you draw the lines, I mean, I think Dr. Orland's point makes sense. I'm not going to, it's a straw vote. We'll come back to it if we need to. But what would be I just want to make sure I'm 100% clear on the actual fiscal impact of it for the people included or not included. Could you restate that one more time?
For the difference between an orange policy area and a red policy area is the red policy area pays 60% less. So the impact tax is 60% less on the transportation tax. Obviously, this has nothing to do with school tax.
Right.
So it's a large difference.
Right.
So the people that under your map, there would be more people or less people paying that 60% less.
And very few less people.
I know there's a lot of less. There's a lot of less in there.
Yeah. It would just be within generally speaking, the white area, the white line. I mean, we probably would want to redraw this if you were to agree with my recommendation to actually follow street boundaries. So it wouldn't be exactly this, but basically anybody within that area would be paying 60% less of a tax. So the medical center area would still be paying what it's paying now rather than getting a 60% discount.
Okay, I'm remembering it now.
The area south of Seminary Road is still paying what they're paying now as opposed to a 60% discount.
Right.
As far as the fiscal impact, we've been looking at all this stuff based on what's in the pipeline. As of right now, my understanding is there's really nothing in the pipeline right now. So we don't have any data on it.
It could have a potential if there were development.
Potential, yes. Yeah.
And I remember now, this made more sense to be contiguous. This would expand an area. And so, I'm going to stick with where I was on the committee.
Thank you. I actually am going to change. I think that the logic has changed my opinion on this. So I guess we're going to need to vote on this one then, if that's the case. All those in favor of the committee recommendation, please raise your hand. And that is 8 people. And those opposed, please raise your hand. And that is Councilmember Jawando. Thank you very much. Okay.
The next item was unanimous of the two committees. The planning board is recommending expanding the Grosvenor-Strathmore policy area to include a couple of properties on the south side of Strathmore Avenue, which are well within a half-mile walk of that metro station. St. Agnes, and I don't recall the other one. Don't have it handy, but that was a unanimous approval of that.
Is that without objection? And that is without objection. Dr. Rowland, please continue.
Okay. With what you've done with Forest Glen, that means 11 of the 13 areas that are within, half mile roughly, we'll call it that, of the metro stations have been covered by metro station policy areas. There's 2 others, Medical Center and Tacoma. Medical Center, and the map for this is on Circle 3, is largely the Federal Reserve, the Walter Reed and NIH. It does include Stone Ridge Academy, It includes a portion of the East Bethesda neighborhood. For this one, there's really no impact from the impact tax, if you will, really, unless I suppose if Stone Ridge were decided to add a building or something. And if there's a vacant lot somewhere in that part of East Bethesda. The biggest impact really would be on the congestion standard, which for the intersections along Rockville Pike, from Jones Bridge Road all the way up to actually Woodmont Avenue, Jones Bridge Road, and all the way up to Cedar Lane, the standard on today's way of looking at it, which is 80 seconds per vehicle, would actually be loosened to 120 seconds per vehicle. What does that mean? It means it would allow for more congestion. On the other hand, it would also mean that the flip side of that is that any further improvements beyond which is already under construction or have just finished in that section is less likely to be done. It may actually also make it a bit easier for the BRT on 355 to be slipped in without violating a standard. So the committee's recommendation, Joint Committee's recommendation on this is to create this policy area. It was unanimous.
Okay.
And then the next.
Any objection? It is without objection.
And the next one in the same vein is Tacoma policy area, which is the next slide, and the attachments, circle 3. Circle 4, I think. Which seeing there is the line showing what is a half mile away from the Tacoma Station. Tacoma Station's in the District of Columbia, but it's right across the line from Tacoma Park. And what would the effect of this be? Well, it would have really no effect. It's sort of the flip side of Medical Center. It wouldn't have really any effect on the congestion standards because the only really road of any size through there is Carroll Avenue that has traffic signals. But the congestion there is actually relatively low. And so going from 80 seconds to 120 seconds per vehicle doesn't really change anything. What again really does is if there's a vacant lot somewhere in that part of Tacoma Park or along Carroll Avenue, if there's a business that wants to expand, its impact tax would be 60% less. And again, the same rationale as all the other Metro Station policy areas. It's within a half-mile walk of the Tacoma Metro Station. And that was unanimous, too. I should add, in the past, the city has asked for this type of thing. I asked them see if they could produce a letter, but they were sort of involved with other issues right now. But the city manager suggests that they would likely be supportive of this because they have in the past.
Okay. Is that without objection? It is without objection. Please move on, Dr. Orman.
Okay. For the next one, since we're talking about Metro Station areas, we need to go to the addendum. And this is the other issue there are a couple of issues in the addendum, but if you go to the addendum and we're looking at page 2 of that packet, it's a sort of an odd situation. The King Buick property on 350.
Sorry, the addendum. Okay, different packet here. We got to open up the addendum.
Yeah, the addendum for today. Yes, that's the other. If it's, I could come back to this if that's. I could keep going with the main packet if that's an issue for folks. I was just doing this because this is again another Metro Station policy area type of issue. But we could do the purple line ones next if you want. I mean, I'll do whatever council pleases.
What is the pleasure of the council?
I would keep going in the document that we're in. We have 12 minutes.
Okay, fine. Well, right. we'll shelve this till next time.
Councilmember Reamer now has a time clock. Okay.
Okay. The question about the purple line came up, and there are two issues here. One had to do with, do we create a set of policy areas for the purple line? There were 3 of them that were created in 2016, one for Chevy Chase Lake, one for Long Branch, one for Tacoma Langley. But they were all given there's a distinction without a difference, really, because they were all given orange classifications, the same as the surrounding Bethesda, Chevy Chase, and Silver Spring, Tacoma policy areas. And the reason for that was, at that time, 2016, the Purple Line was not programmed for construction. And we don't count something as a given in the growth policy for transportation unless it's programmed within 6 years, for completion within 6 years. However, now the Purple Line is under construction to some degree. Right now it's stalled, but it's 30%, 35% complete. And so the idea is, yes, it's now a time to treat the areas around Purple Line stations differently in the growth policy or in the SSP than it has been in the past. And so the planning board had recommended Purple Line policy areas for Chevy Chase Lake and for Littonsville and for Woodside and for the Dale Drive Manchester Place area and for and continuing it for the Long Branch and Tacoma Langley areas. The issue I brought up was that, first of all, I should say that the joint committees agreed 5-0 that there should be Purple Line policy areas of some way, shape, or form. The county executive had not recommended that, but the committees were unanimous on that. But the second issue is, where do you draw the boundaries? And initially, the joint committees voted 3-2, 3 in favor of my suggestion that we redraw these boundaries to, again, conform to a half-mile walkshed around each of these stations. And those 3 were Mr. Katz, Ms. Navarro, and Mr. Jawando. And the 2 who recommended agreement with the planning board were Mr. Reamer and Mr. Friedson. However, I said at the time was that we needed to redraw or to draw actual boundaries based not just in a literal half mile, but something that would follow definable boundaries, streets, streams, that sort of thing, which we did subsequent to that meeting. We came back to a Fed committee meeting on October 9th, I believe it was, and showed that to the Fed members, which included Mr. Reamer and Mr. Friedson, who had voted with the planning board, but they concurred with these new boundaries, which I'm about to show you. So effectively, the 5 council members who are on the 2 committees are now agreeing with what I'm about to show you. So if you look at the first slide, which is the one after the Tacoma Langley one, the Chevy Chase boundary is actually a bit smaller than the current one because the walkshed doesn't include the existing residential area sort of along East-West Highway in the eastern part of the policy area. But it does include all the developable area and all the multifamily. The next area is the Littonsville station, Purple Line station, which is again a half mile from the Littonsville Purple Line station as is under construction. The next slide is the map of the Woodside policy area, which is a half mile from that proposed station, except where it would the half mile goes into Silver Spring, which exists already. And then finally, what we found was that the stations east of Silver Spring are so close together that you could have one consolidated policy area that would combine them all. And if you look at the slide on, I suppose this is, circle 8, you'll see the white line describes it. It's actually a broader area than what the planning board had recommended. And those are all areas within a half-mile walk. Like what I had suggested for Forest Glen, a lot of these areas are already built out. But the reason for drawing it widely is because there may be some vacant lots where someone could build a house and they're within a half-mile walk of the station. So that's why they were drawn the way they were. And again, this was effectively a 5-0 recommendation as well. So those are those boundaries.
Okay, Councilmember Reamer.
I just want to observe, drawing these boundaries is really important for a lot of other reasons. It has a huge impact on what you end up doing with your transportation fixes. It has a huge impact on how much traffic you're trying to solve for versus other modes. It has a huge impact on the taxes that are charged. So this is a big one. And just, on the boundary itself, I think we felt like in Forest Glen, we had just done a master plan, we had come up with an approach, and that made sense there. But generally speaking, the other applications of this watershed made sense. So, that's how we arrived where we are.
Okay. So at this point, Dr. Orleans, if I understand, it is a unanimous vote by the committee. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, the two committees, let's put it this way, the 5 members of the two committees all agree with these maps.
Okay. At this point, is this without objection then? I'm saying head shake from both sides of the original two committees. Okay. There. Yes,
but maybe we could have Casey just make a comment as to what this is about. I mean, it may not be transparent. It's a big one. I think it's worth a comment.
I'm sorry. Are we still on boundaries, or are we moving on?
We're just adding purple line, creating purple line areas.
Right. Well, I think that what Councilmember Friedson said a few minutes ago is right on about the red area boundaries, and it applies to the purple line areas. It's not just about whether or not people are going to take the train. It's also about recognizing that these areas are supposed to be transit oriented in their development pattern. So the land use context should have a mobility approach that matches the idea not just of transit but of walkability. We shouldn't be widening all the roads. We shouldn't be adding turn lanes in intersections. We shouldn't be trying to get cars moving through at 50 miles an hour. We're trying to make these neighborhoods more urban context and something that's more conducive, not just to taking transit, but all the benefits that come with living in a place with a compact form and a variety of uses that support all kinds of different services that make these really vibrant neighborhoods. And that's what the appeal of urbanism is really all about. So that's really, I think, what it amounts to. It's not just about what is the amount of money that's paid or what is the likelihood that people will walk half a mile to get on the metro or 3/4 of a mile or a quarter mile or whatever the distance is. It's a recognition that these are supposed to be more urbanized neighborhoods that have transit as the centerpiece, but that's just sort of the icing on the cake.
Okay.
And I would say in response to that's a good side effect of what the policy has been, but the rationale initially, and maybe it can change now, has been based on transit accessibility only. All right, the next issue though was when there was a divided
So
vote.
if I understand now, we haven't voted, so that's without objection, right?
Right.
Okay. Now, Glenn, we are at 3 minutes left. So is this one, is this one going to take longer than that, or are we?
Yeah, I think this one's going to take longer.
Okay. So if it is without objection, we're going to move. We're going to stop this meeting. We're going to adjourn this meeting, but please note that we do have a meeting on Thursday, November 5th. We do not have a meeting on Tuesday because that's election day. But on Thursday, November 5th, we have a meeting at 9:30 in the morning, and that's when we're going to be discussing the 270, 495, and environmental. And then at 1:30 in the afternoon, we're going to take this up again. And the Public Safety and Government Operations Committee meeting, the joint meeting, has been changed. Well, has been postponed. But Dr. Orland, and just as Councilmember Navarro suggested earlier, it would be helpful if we could just have the parts that we'll be discussing on Thursday, and I see Ms. Dunn shaking her head, on Thursday, so that we can review those without going through the rest that we've already reviewed or we won't be reviewing.
Sure. I guess I'll talk to Pam about this too, but as far as the items from the earlier part of the day that you wanted to get back to,
well, that's on there too. Yeah.
That would need to be added.
Right.
If it's okay with you, what I'll do is just sort of reconstitute part 2, and then add whatever from the earlier part of the meeting. But we'll try.
However you can do it is fine, but we would like it to be less
hefty,
right.
Like a cover sheet, maybe.
We don't need 5,000 pages. Okay, each time. Very good. Thank you. Yes, Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, are we intending to do straw votes on all of the outstanding items next Thursday afternoon? Is that the intention?
I think we're going to try to do it just like we did this.
Okay, I just want to set, I mean, we've had a tough time here of like setting expectations of what the meetings were going to accomplish. So I just want to set the expectation for the public and for council members and for staff that the intention is we are going to go into the meeting on Thursday and we're going to have a packet that discusses specifically the straw vote items that are outstanding, and we are planning on taking a straw vote on each of those. And so if there are questions, research, analyses that need to take place, we should do them before that.
Right, and I'll get to you in 2 seconds, Councilmember Reamer. But if the council, there again, there's going to be some flexibility. If the majority of the council does not want to take a straw vote on something, then we won't. But at some point, we're going to have to take a vote.
Right, item by item. The
item by
the body
item,
will
absolutely.
prevail as it always does. I just think it's important that we understand the expectations for meetings before we go into them.
Can I jump in on this? We have the November 5th time now. We also have November 10th, which originally was going to be the date that was just really for action, final action with resolutions. But we're thinking that's probably also going to need to be a day for some straw votes and for some substantive discussion. And for example, one of the things on that day would be the transition language, grandfathering transition, which you haven't talked about yet. And so that then you would come back on November 16th in the middle of the day, or at some point in the day, we haven't figured the exact time, to actually do the final action on the SSP and the impact tax. And then whether or not you want to take up the recordation tax on November 10th or not, we'll just sort of hang loose and see what happens. But certainly try to finish substantively all of the SSP and impact tax material by the close of November 10th. So you really have 2 more work sessions to use. And if you could finish on the 5th, great, but just in case, you've got the extra day.
Councilmember Reamer.
Well, I think to set expectations, I would guess we have 2, full council sessions remaining to get through everything. And I think we could get through everything, including recordation tax. But I think we have 2 full sessions remaining. That would be my guess.
Okay. All right. Well, anybody else have any guesses? If not, we're going to adjourn this meeting. Okay. No, I think you're probably right. I think we can do this, but we're going to do it step by step, and we're going to do it so that this is very important information, very important effect on all of Montgomery County. So we're going to do it as the time frame that is necessary. Thank you all very much for being with us. Yes, Councilmember Navarro, I'm sorry. I thought you were waving goodbye.
Please be sure to vote, everybody.
Oh,
Thank
yes.
you.
In fact, we all should say that. That is something. Please vote.
Say it.
Please
vote.
Yeah. If anybody has listened to this meeting to its entirety, believe me, they're going to go out and vote. They are dedicated citizens. I'm telling you. Thank you. We are adjourned.